So to take off from where I left off the other time, a very quick scan of some pub ID. I had wanted to just not disclose it yet because there is a chance the pub will just use them. But anyway, I'll just review some of the names and I'm going to discuss them in some of the technical criminal law methodology. So you can see here that this is a summation table, and this is under the PowerPoint 11, which is on Computer Bank of England, Computer Bank of Russia, and the Computer Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And you can see here that in this table, it's a quick sum up of some of the company, and you can see that the global Indians, they are on trespassers status. And if you map out, it's against the dollars group. So JP Morgan is one of the company on space-based distributed ledger technology transactions, which I will discuss shortly. And you can see that the rupees versus the plots, such as the USMCA plot, in other words, the dollar stash, you can see these are some of the Indian names and Muslim names. So Muslim can be like, for example, Malaysian ringgit versus the dollars group stash, which is why they have to run a World City scam in order to use the World City's ID in order to enter the dollars group zone. So this will be the format for calculating the total amount of loot. Meaning, like, you can trace the race groups, and then you can compute the total amount of robbery multiplied by the number of years that they were in the position in all these banks. So there is JP Morgan space-based distributed ledger technology transactions. There is also, for example, Microsoft pattern, which is by John Marley Gray, which I will discuss very shortly. But he brought in and looped in another two more Indian names. Now you can see here. I'm not going to read out, but it will be on the table. It'll be uploaded after everything is ready, for example. Okay, so there's some discretion. I'll be considering some of the factors. So there's IBM log contracts, which I will also discuss shortly. And you can see again there's Indian names from India, Erode, and Bangalore, and also Muslim names that is inside European states. And also very important, the T-Mobile, because they turn up in the court. So T-Mobile and Sprint, they loop in, as you can see here, is Indian name. And Bank of America, it's Joseph Castinado. But again, he loop in two more Indian names, and they are from Bangalore. And based on where I stopped off the other time, you can see that the bill was sponsored by the Republican representatives, and these are the names, right? These are the Republican representatives that stated very clearly. You can see Warren Davidson, Mike Flood, Baron Donalds, Pete Sessions, Andy Biggs, Yong Kim, Ralph Norman, Barry Loudermilk. You can search out their names and you can read extensively how they represented the United States of America and stated very clearly. And I already explained in the previous video at PowerPoint 11 that I've read out the law on this, that it is prohibited to offer products and directly to an individual using CBDC, which is actually COVAX or microchipping. And also the other very important law is not to use it for monetary policy, meaning you cannot microchip the citizens and then use this microchip in their bodily cells to manipulate for monetary policy at the national level. In other words, the monetary variables targets adjustment at a national level, a population that have been microchipped. So these two are the laws that stated by the American representatives and the American law. So to add on, the American law prohibition applies to all these self-titled global Indians trespassers in BIS, WEF, WHO, ICA, or IMF, transported from one location in India to various cities, and they use the World Cities ID in order to enter the dollar zone in order to collect the stash versus rupees. And number two, refers to infra-chip bank. Because the word infra is short for infrastructure, so it can stand for construction bank, which basically just means land thieves. And versus the eternal land that the offsprings of a nation will inherit. And the infra-chip bank also refers to COVAX chip in brain, for example, WB, which uses an Indian cashier to COVAX murder the Americans and cash in from Washington, D.C. And the infra-chip B can also have a third meaning, which is tier 1, tier 2. They will infra-chip the existing infrastructure of tier 1, tier 2 banks. And these banks, they will hire the global Indians in, for example, perhaps the IT department, to just computer controller and processor chip the entire tier 2 banks and tier 1 banks, and the BIS will dupe the entire tier 1 and tier 2 using a global Indian with no blueprint. And I already mentioned the pilot program involves companies like BNY Mellon, Citi, HSBC, MasterCard, PNC Bank, TD Bank, Truist, US Bank, and Wells Fargo. And here is just like another example of global Indian trespassers, rupees versus dollar stash. For example, I mentioned that Singapore was a 60-year loophole. So the global Indian trespassers, they will use word like New York, advertise exclusive only as a product sold in Singapore and not in New York, which is why it's suspicious immediately, obviously, because it is a BNY New York product, but it is not sold in New York. And furthermore, I already mentioned that they are part of a pilot program inside New York. They are the COVAX chip infra-chip pilot banks. Test subjects. So it is being rolled out. As you can see very clearly here, this is the official brochure of the website that is shown very blatantly. It's showing you a picture of the COVAX rollout, which is COVAX chip kill Americans and the world plots. Part of the World Cities ID scam because they need the World Cities ID in order to enter the dollar zone. So the usage of the word New York and world cities such as Singapore, it's not Singapore. For example, if you see the word SGX is PERP ID run, it's not Singapore. By the B, short for bank, EB electronic bank, trading casino B, which means the monitor screen is subject to just pressing a lot of zeros, and the WB COVAX chip will cash in on killing by COVAX, Wi-Fi log on the bodily cells, which I will explain in the other sections. And all Bs is simply a transfer of world money, and it will result in a world money shrink to the PERP ID Tom's pocket and their offspring. That's why it is a case of eternal land that is forbidden, which is the construction B, which is synonymous with infrastructure and synonymous with development because they're touching the land. And the land is eternal land owned by the offspring of PERP ID that self-title themselves as a B. And then they put for example, a global Indian and self-title themselves as money. something official PERP ID over all these Tier 1 and Tier 2 banks and also BIS versus the offspring, the rightful offspring that will inherit the land. So it's a transfer of world money shrink to a PERP ID Tom. It could be any random Tom that just call himself a B, and then he will just put all the card imposters and all the money titles to be an official person, but in fact PERP. And this kind of crime is called war crime under international law, and it is murder status attached, which also could explain why they had to pick the global Indians as a reformat of the Jews as the new Jews plot. It is war crime, meaning it is murder, and that's why there's a murder status attached, and you cannot count eternal land. So eternal land owed versus the owed by the PERP offspring and whose forefathers are the land thieves. And so that's why it became a war land targets, which I've already drafted out in a separate table, and I'll be covering it in under the US, China, Japan, Korea space law section, as well as the Computer Nordic. So what I just mentioned will be the satellites log on topic under PowerPoint 9. So let me just continue on with where I stopped off the other time, which is the 11.4 computer pulse model. The Computer Bank of England will be explained using the following company names. For example, the IBM pattern, the JP Morgan pattern, the American Express document, the Microsoft document, the Sprint and T-Mobile document. And all these company brands that are cross-referenced to seek to explain the Computer Bank of England model. All these company brands did not appear inside the Bank of England document at all. Okay. So I just want to show that there are namely just one or two documents revolving around the Computer Bank of England, one of which is the BIS Innovation Hub. They can name it any city, like from even outside of London. So it is called the BIS Innovation Hub London Centre Project Rosalind, developing the prototype for API Retail CBDC, which is actually just a computer chip. And so this is the website where the original document came from. And there is also a diagram available, which is the two-tier model that I've been showing, the Project Rosalind, building a criminal API prototype for retail CBDC ecosystem document, which is also on the BIS website. So that's just one document from BIS and for the Computer Bank of England. And also there is another document which is from the Computer Bank of England itself. For the Project Meridian real-time gross settlement, I will be cross-referencing with the Bank of America real-time net settlement by distributed ledger system. So what I'm trying to say is that these two documents from the Computer Bank of England itself and from the BIS website, the Innovation Criminal Hubs, they have very short descriptions. They do not have or show the blueprint and the explanations for these very short descriptions. are just cross-referenced with alternative company brand names that can plausibly explain what the prototypes or the two-tier model that the original documents claims in their brochures. So as mentioned, the first document was from the BIS, and the second set of document is from the Computer Bank of England. You can see here, and it is an announcement initially, and then it is called the Digital Pounds Technology Working Paper. So this is where all the short descriptions came about, and this is where you see the direct extract of the blueprint drawings that I've shown in the previous video. They do not contain the exact full blueprints, and I use alternative brand names to try and piece out as a cross-reference what the original documents can mean. So this is the second original document where the Computer Bank of England appeared. So under the Computer Bank of England, referring to the very short brochure, I pick out. So in this cross-reference, I picked JP Morgan as a very good exemplary model to explain the Computer Bank of England model. So using this one JP Morgan pattern, I would be using it as a cross-reference to go deeper into what the three characteristics mentioned in the Computer Bank of England model states. The first being programmability, the second is automated payments, and the third is programmable wallets. So in the Computer Bank of England document, if you open up a brochure, I took out only what is really important, but it is very short. It's point 5, which states that programmability refers to the ability to run units of functionality or programs that effect a change on the core ledger triggered when predetermined conditions are met or initiated directly. It enables locking mechanisms that allow PIPs and ESIPs to implement programmability features that include smart contracts and earmark funds on the core ledger. And if you continue looking on the BIS CBDC UK 0.7 on programmability, so you can see here that I use a first document, which is the Computer Bank of England document 0.5, and I cross-reference with the BIS CBDC UK 0.7 on programmability, the same point, the first point. And then I will use the JP Morgan to explain. So the Computer Bank of England programmability section, I will supplement and cross-reference with explanations using exemplary company cross-references like JP Morgan on programmable payments enabled by triggers, including the sandbox simulator, on-chain event listener, change agent, on-chain Oracle-like model. So this is what it looks like. The JP Morgan systems and methods for programmable payments enabled by triggers based on mutual validation. And you can see that on the left-hand side is the programmable events, which resonates with events like Event 201, the Wuhan 100 plus military sports excuse event, and other events. So programmable events, distributed ledger technology, quote unquote sandbox, you can see the diagram. And then there is the on-chain figure 2, on-chain agent 130, off-chain agent 140, and actuator 144 change agent. And on the right-hand side, you can see that this is the exact diagram that is taken off the BIS Innovation Hub London Center called the Project Rosalind bracket sandbox. Because these two are like brochures, the Computer Bank of England, with very short but important descriptions, which I've already extracted and put it into the document. And also the BIS Innovation Hub, they provide this diagram, but it is not the entire blueprint. It states it is called Project Architecture Two-Tier Model UK CBTC Computer Pounds. So bracket sandbox. So this is the reason why I picked the JP Morgan pattern to explain the sandbox that appears inside the BIS Project Rosalind. So first of all, the distributed ledger 110. You can see it's here, right? It's an algorithm. So the distributed ledger network is 110. And it's defined as a network that supports cryptographically verifiable transactions. For example, the Ethereum-based network. So API, where is the API? So it is financial institution 120. Okay, let me just. You can see here the financial institution. There are like three logos of financial institutions. They are all 120. So financial institution 120 can communicate with another financial institution 120 through the API. And each financial institution 120 has a graphical programming interface 122. So I'm just checking if it appears here so that you can have a clearer understanding visually. So you can see here that there is a graphical programming interface for the financial institution 120 and an interface with the client device 150. So the client device 150 would either be their electronic devices or the COVAX in-brain. So you can see over here, it is represented by a computer device 150 of the end user by an application 155 program. So you can see that 155 is inside it is like a software application that is programmable. So it is called the application 155 computer program inside the client device 150, which is, for example, his computer as the end user. And agent 125, you can see over here, agent 125, on-chain 130 and off-chain 140. So you can see over here, on-chain 130 and off-chain 140. And let's talk about the sandbox environment. The reason why we are looking at the sandbox environment because it appears in the BIS Project Rosalind. So I'm just using the JP Morgan company document by Liu Dapeng as a exemplary model to explain what it can possibly mean inside the very short descriptive brochure in the BIS and the Computer Bank of England brochures. So you can see that the sandbox environment, it is defined as a synthetic, okay, so you can see it over here, right, that it is defined as a synthetic transactions or events. So you can see it over here. The sandbox simulator is here. It is the JP Morgan's way of explaining. It does not necessarily mean that it is an exact copy in the Computer Bank of England, but I'm just using JP Morgan as a cross-reference to possibly explain what the Computer Bank of England can mean. So the Simulator 126 provide a sandbox environment to reflect the behavior of system 100. So you can see here, this is 100, and 100 is the system for this entire diagram, figure 1, programmable events, distributed ledger sandbox. So it reflects the behavior of system 100 that eventually execute the program code. For example, the graphical programming interface with synthetic transactions or events. Now let's look at the BIS London Rosalind project document. The computer bank ledger layer simulation includes account base, token base. I will be explaining the exact basic definitions in the Computer Yuan section to test if the core API layer can simplify or remove differences in ledger structures. So you can see that the core API layer is here, the blue column. And the Computer Bank of England ledger layer, which is the orange column, includes the account base and token base to test if the core API ledger can simplify or remove differences in ledger structures. The account-based ledger use Ethereum-based Hyperledger Besu and a proxy contract model for smart contract. The token-based ledger use Hyperledger Fabric blockchain and a smart contract implemented to mimic unspent transaction output amount or UTXO model. So UTXO is just a short form for unspent transaction output. The Ledger API, Distributed Ledger Technology, or DLT for short, the Ledger API layer translates the smart contracts into API calls and transform the API request into a format understood by and actionable for the computer bank ledger. Smart contracts, auto conversion into app programmable direct calls. So you can see here that the core API layer, which is in the Rosalind sandbox, its main focus is to orchestrate messages through the API endpoints with end-to-end encryption between service providers claiming no personal identifiable information passed to the computer bank. But this, of course, is questionable because even JP Morgan openly admits that the PII, which is personal identifiable information, is exposed. They laid out very clearly. And this is the layer that includes the Rosalind Sandbox, which is a developer portal and central repository of technical documentation. The sandbox supports API users and tech sprint participants. So note that this Sprint Tech is the company that Masayoshi Son and Bill Gates of T-Mobile, NASDAQ, and T-Systems turn up in the Northern District of California court, which I will be covering in a separate chapter on the American telecommunications law. I can continue sharing. 11.4.2. Let me just Okay, so let's look at the JP Morgan pattern. And let's have a refresh of the Computer Pulse model. You can see here that it is the BIS. They can name it any city in the world. So in this case, it's London. And you can see that project pixel project on stable coins, which economically and legally speaking is not stable. Is not an accurate word usage. And Project Rosalind, which is what I'm discussing here, and you will start to see the application programming interface and interoperability. And Project Meridian, it's another brochure. The real-time gross settlement will be explained using cross-reference with other, but I may not actually have the time to include that. There's just many things to explore. So it will be perhaps explored in greater detail in the judgment document. So let me explain the JP Morgan cross-reference. In the JP Morgan pattern, let's try and understand what is the false master puppet arrangement. There is an agent 125, and he is described as an entity that has balanced awareness, capability as a robot, like program function to execute actions, for example, sweeping funds for liquidity optimization. Agent 125, it is unclear what his identity is, but it is clear that it has a computation function. So it may not be like a human being. It can have an owner. So the owner could be a human being. It can be another robot. But the point is that there is a master puppet robot relationship with the ability to post time date, first initiation, expiration date, working hours trigger mechanism, hence time oracle, event oracle, with a reporting branch code and more than one account under the control and percept sequence. So now let's look at the concept on sequential percept and truncated percept. What is the meaning of sequential percept? So a sequential percept is a complete history of observations up to the present time. A truncated percept refers to dealing with an episode event. For example, monthly recurring computer program. And if a particular chip contains entire industries, then it will not just be individuals, it will be monthly recurring computer program entire state. So like if there's 13 states in USA, then it will be multiplied by monthly recurring computer program multiplied by 13 states, for example, of all the industries. So this is the meaning of truncated percept sequence, whereas sequential percept just refers to complete historical chronological history of observations up to the present time. There's two more things about agent 125. Okay, you can see him here. He's somewhere. Right, there's on-chain, there's off-chain, but there is 125 assigned to him. Agent 125, you can see here where my arrow cursor is pointing at. He appears here, and you can see here these financial institutions are all the banks, tier 1, tier 2. So BIS, so there are two more things about Agent 125. He is a time traveler, an event interceptor directly in contract formation, and he can be a programmable robot or plural programmable robots to be used if necessary or desired. To further confirm the exact and explicit meaning of the writer, he speaks of a single agent universe. More descriptions about this agent 125, because this is based on the particular pattern document writer. He can pattern what he believes he is capable of creating. So this does not necessarily refer to any of the computer bank. It's merely an explanation of what the word sandbox can possibly mean. So more descriptions about this more than one agent 125. It can be a multi-computerized programmable agents environment sandbox. You can employ computer rules to prevent, for example, quote, a poorly written agent 125 from falling into an infinite loop, thereby excluding other agents 125 from executing at all. So based on this quote, a poorly written scripted agent refers to a virtual script writer that defines a virtual environment that designs the characters called agents 125, programming rules that can be poorly written or can be brilliantly written. And falling here refers to the inability of the virtual inability of that robotic or agent entity 125 to be able to get out of a virtual infinite loop. So in other words, it can refer to a trapped agent in a trap zone. So an analogy could be like the Looper movie. So basically in that particular movie, which is not the JP Morgan pattern and which is not the Rosalind sandbox, it's just merely an extension of an analogy to understand what is the meaning of an infinite loop described in the JP Morgan pattern, which refers to a trap agent in a trap zone unable to get out of the virtual infinite loop due to poor programming rules. Could be, for example, the Looper movie. It contains a poorly written agent whose job in that movie, which is a story script, was to take out unknown persons teleported to his presence at an appointed time until it is the appointed time for him to take himself out from a future timeline, teleported to his younger self timeline for self-destruct. So the word self-destruct did appear in the JP Morgan's document, but in that JP Morgan context, it could just refer to a robot with the capability to detonate, for example, an explosion or just simply destroy its own circuitry. So this JP Morgan is attempting to explain time-traveling technology, usage of a designed virtual environment, the capability to operate programmable robots called Agent 125, which you can see very clearly in Figure 1. The ability to intercept, which can be considered unlawful manipulation of programmable beings because it's tied to a contract which is stipulated conditions, stipulated terms agreed by both parties. So if there is a intercept agent 125, then it means the capability to manipulate some aspects of a previously agreed agreement. And the ability to intercept is also because of the predictability, for example, episodic recurring monies in the truncated percept sequence for contract formation, which obviously will be in favor of whichever company that patents this. They would want it to be in their favor. So in that sense, it's not very legal. And then there is a IBM scheduler. Let's understand what is the IBM scheduler. So under type A sequential percept, agent 125 has to wait for actions to complete in a sequence within the same tick. Thus, if he is blocked, the scheduler, for example, I will be also explaining using the IBM neuromorphic system scheduler. There is then no way for the scheduler to switch execution to another agent 125 and the outcome may be rigged. It's not it's the outcome will be change sequence So I will explain more under the IBM scheduler. Then there is the spider web. Okay, so spider web is also discussed in the JP Morgan pattern because it is up to the creator to pattern what he thinks he's capable of doing. And this is his way of explaining some of the concepts that appear in the keyword sandbox, Roslyn BIS. So under spider web, I will just extend this point by saying that you can imagine it in terms of 6 points, 8 points, 16 points, infinite points. There will be a center point. It is a kind of control thread. So for example, the IBM scheduler is set to allow each agent 125 to decide, number one, the time, when to surrender control over to the execution thread. And you would have already heard of this term from Elon Musk when he designed the false version of the robotic thread in brain, which is false because the real version is the COVAX graphene oxide in brain microchipping. So his version is actually the false cell. So the execution thread, and also you can think in terms of like the address of the Computer Bank of England. What does it say? It says thread needle. That is the address. So time when to surrender control over to the execution thread, over to the next agent 125 on the list, and every action started by one agent 125 may be completed before control is returned to the control thread. Okay, the next item is total ordering under JP Morgan. So within these computer virtual constraints, a total ordering is a consistent on-chain, off-chain developed. You can see here in figure 2, there is on-chain agent and there is an off-chain agent. JP Morgan considered this as an important property, computer property actually, for certain computer virtual environments, such as the agents that send payments JP Morgan's favor out from a limited pool of money. So, but how he tried to explain this was that, for example, the first agent 125 running would send a payment request out, and the payment completes before a second agent 125 is permitted to draw on the same amount of pools. So JP, in this context, the company that registers this would consider it a danger if the second executing agent draws out the same pool of funds and the payment fails to complete. Okay, the next point is time-limited time-traveling agent. Since the entire programmable robots groups, all called agents 125, they always reach their goals first. There is this mention of whether or not it is unfair depending on the amount of work to be completed within the one tick. All these things are like concepts that is discussed in this particular pattern. So it will be in the context of the writer. We are just merely exploring these exemplary documents to try and understand the very brief descriptive brochure that appears in the Rosalind sandbox. So he speaks of complex impacts of choices in relation to the maximum number of blocks of discrete actions that a particular number of agent 125 can tick on, and the capped time that the agent 125 have, the block time, the external systems connected to sensors and actuators. If it's somewhere here, you can take a look. Actuators and sensors and the number of agents that run the service level agreements or SLA. And low latency, what is the meaning of low latency? Latency just refers to the processing ability to run as many scripts concurrently without slowing down, and the ability to process a massive amount of events in an instant. So all these descriptions clearly points to a computer. Computer's ability to run many scripts concurrently without slowing down, and the ability to process a massive amount of events in an instant. Meaning the ability of, for example, because the pattern writer registered as JP Morgan, so it would be the ability of JP Morgan to run as many virtual scripts containing the scripted characters called agents 125 intercepting to manipulated contracts in JP Morgan's favor simultaneously, and the ability to run enormous amount of false events, for example, false flags, real flags, or events that are not necessarily very good. For example, biochem weapons in this writer's work, underwriting with a record of underwriting war bonds. So this is how it looks like. I'm just explaining what the writer is trying to express, and I see this technology as a potential to do the opposite way, that is to reverse on potential popes worldwide. Can be a very good system for eliminating all popes. This is both ways. It can be used to remove and decree justice actually. So this is a blueprint. For example, he designed it. It shows the JP Morgan on-chain agent, contract data 132, action picker 134, enclave system 137, and on-chain agent. So you can see here, right, this is system 137. He named it, and there is on-chain 130, off-chain 140, action picker 134. Right, so you pick an action. Privacy manager 136, enclave system 137. So contract data 132. I think the enclave system could be here. Looks like the same. So there's an enclave system. Sorry, yeah, it's here, right? You can see here, right? Enclave system 137. The results of the simulation analyze define a simulation period. There will be a start and time, and then you run a simulation using known or synthetic actions with different parameters related to account liquidity, and then a simulation setup. There are race agents, meaning the competing agents 1 to 5 are program robots. They are competing, so they are called race agents. There is sandbox simulator 126. So it's shown earlier on. Right, you can see here the simulator. 126 is here. Right, enlarge it, you'll be able to see the sandbox simulator 126. There is a target time slice, for example, a single tick. In other words, TikTok, which is where they derive all their companies' names from. For example, to simulate a net impact of running all agents 1 to 5 across all users within the single target time slice, for example, a single tick, and decide on a total ordering before executing the entire set of resulting actions on-chain and off-chain, which you can see here, on-chain and off-chain through actuations. Now let's look at the sandbox simulator 126, which is over here. Net impact of running all agents 1 to 5 within a target time slice, that is a single TikTok. For example, the simulator 126 load one or multiple programs code together. Loading the multiple programs or code together can give insights on how the programs or code impact each other. Then the simulator 126 load and set account parameters, for example, opening balance, credit limit, adjusted for different simulations to see changes to the account liquidity. The simulator 126 import known transactions or create synthetic transactions, which provide insights, for example, impact the account liquidity throughout the day using a defined simulation period, for example, start end. And you will see me discuss and explain the word parameters in the W0666 Microsoft pattern to get a clearer understanding of what parameters and vectors are in bodily cells. Let's continue on. So regarding this Service Legal Agreement, SLA, what is it? It claims that the clients, meaning BioWeb Synapse, for instance, they got a COVAX shot, and they are also the clients. They chose this bank, they like this bank, JP Morgan. They can write time travel, and they can deploy their own scripts in a virtual environment and observe their transactions. As to what kind of transactions, it is unclear, but it also means that it's programmable. It's up to the company, it's up to the clients. It could be like insurance, which I will be also explaining in some other company brands, including severely disabled, which is actually caused by the COVAX Wi-Fi. And because it is actually graphene oxide and silicon oxide into the body cells. Nonetheless, what kind of transaction? The point is they can observe the transaction and the event latencies, the speed, real time, and adopt smart. So again, all these keywords smart with reference to. So I will be discussing this in the IBM model by Jakub Manevich. Preventive is also another key aspect, meaning the ability to abort. And I can extend this in terms of, for example, if the person is traveling to Mars, he paid to travel to Mars, and something happens, then you must have the ability to abort and data-driven approach to managing service levels with dependent system partners. So the concurrency will be handled. This is what the patent writer is trying to explain. Like he's trying to describe a lot of concepts, technical concepts. So in terms of how to handle concurrency, he explains that he will just he suggests putting, for example, number one, priority flag, number two, target time slice for execution to set up a length of time. For example, 5 minutes will be considered long enough for most actions to be completed. So for instance, priority flags when you're running agents 1 to 5 from the same account owner by sorting higher priority agents to run first. Okay, now let's look at the enclave system 137. So you can see over here that the enclave system in the off-chain agent, in the cross-reference JP Morgan document, 137, let's examine it, includes Tessera, which is Java, and the second one is Crux, which is Golang, enclave systems that tie the access to private transactions to the storage model of underlying blockchain network. This means that in an operating model where clients do not meet their own nodes but run on a common infrastructure, the private information is still stored in a common medium behind the enclave's interface. It is admitted openly by the patent owner of JP Morgan that this may itself be a breach of information commingling standards, but is the preferred solution. Okay, now let's look at the Privacy Manager 136. So you can see over here, Privacy Manager 136. And what is it? It is a secure hash algorithm privacy manager. With the PII short for personal identifying information, which is supposed to protect using proxies created secure hash algorithms. However, it is stated that hashing may not protect against linking of simpler PII, such as government-issued identity numbers. Second is the legal entity identifiers of a company. And third, institutions' names can trivially be hashed into a lookup dictionary and uncovered code by brute force. Off-chain agent is over here, 140. What is it? Off-chain agent comprises of one Oracle 143 and sensor 142, which is beneath Oracle 143, actuator 144, which you can see over here, the event listener 145, outbound message bus or API 146. The event listener 145 or action picker 134. For example, the event listener 145 identify an event that meets a trigger condition. Then simulate the action selected by the action picker 134. So there will be execution logic, for example, if the event simulation is successful, liquidity goals are met, and the action executed. The alternative from inside the computation logic, which is the program code, if the simulation is unsuccessful, a message generated and action held pending. So this is computer logic, which can be illogical, which can be unlawful, but it is the logic here refers to the programmer programming a particular code in the format of 1 and 2. If simulation is successful, then liquidity goals will be met. Right, okay. If simulation is successful, liquidity goals met, then the action will be executed. But if simulation is unsuccessful, a message generated and the action held pending. So it is a programming code. That does not necessarily mean that it's logical, doesn't necessarily mean that it is lawful either. It just simply means logic in terms of a program code. So change agent model, let's look at the next concept, which is the change agent model or the Ethereum virtual machine, which is a very important concept because it appears in the tier 1 computer models like Computer Bank of England. So we want to understand what this Ethereum virtual machine can mean. Cross-reference using the JP Morgan document. Actuator 144 is a mechanism by the agent 125. So agent 125 appears here. Right, you can see that he's here, agent 125. And the actuator is here, 144 in figure 2. This is figure 2. All right, previously I put them side by side. Agent 125 next to figure 2, 144 actuator. So I'm going to talk about actuator 144. It's a mechanism by which agent 125 is defined as an entity able to change its environment. For example, actuator 144 makes changes to the state of an Ethereum virtual machine or EMV that results in emission, so I will include the definition of emission as emitting, as in, for example, electromagnetic radiation from an antenna, and the antenna can be in-brain if, for example, COVAX circuitry chip, or it can refer to a celestial body, for example, sun, moon, and stars, and emission of an antenna that is placed on a celestial body or in outer space, for example, satellite, or it could be like emission of events, and the external modules were able to pick up and carry out actions. So this is the meaning of emission, and what this actuator 144 is saying is that it is a mechanism by which the agent 125, which is a program coded entity, is able to change the environment and make changes to the state of an Ethereum virtual machine EVM. Okay, the second point is use a trigger word. Use a trigger word that gives agent 125, which is a non-human programmable entity, a generic capability to do simple word-based pattern matching within a free text or a structured data field. For example, access to a data feed about incoming payments credited to user's bank account or structured data identifying payer with one or more fields related to payer's address. So, for example, explained by the pattern writer that the agent is directed to check one or more address fields for the existence of a keyword, a pattern of words, and decide on questionable, because this so-called decision isn't, it is robotic course of action. So that is some legal questions there. And the graphical programming interface. Let's look at the graphical programming interface. Okay, you can see over here the graphical programming interface 122 of the financial institution 120. The graphical programming interface 122 is directed to visual programming language, which is the interface for the composition of triggers. It is stated that blocks are specific and contextual to account services and payment services of, for example, JP Morgan, provided by banks to compose triggers in a multi-bank and multi-organizational in nature. So I can extend this to, because this is like the company's personal visualization, like they envision that this can be used for multi-organization. So I would just suggest it could be like, for example, not just exclusive to banks, but because the transactions can be across the largest F&B, for example, McDonald's or hotels group, or like airlines, for example. So the visual programming language compiles into bytecode provided to one or more agent 125, and the code is deployed to the action picker 134. The blocks can use a visual programming environment, for example, ownership and access control, looping, for example, looping, conditional statements, private and shared percepts, operators, for example, logic and mathematical functions, data, for example, properties associated with the agent or other agents accessible, actuators or other change agents that allow for changes to the environment, including interactions with other change agents. Okay, the next concept is build logic. So this capacity is used to build logic. For example, logic for conditional payments. For example, payment made out to a supplier made only when a corresponding payment is received from a customer at a certain address. So all these capability is based on keywords within a reference data, which is stored, can be in contravention and omitted of being explained in the GDPR law, because the reference data could be secretly stored in, for example, the body cells, and, for example, introduced by a COVAX chip. And so it is based on keywords and is related to incoming payment, identifying the item paid for. Now let's look at the off-chain agent sensor 142. You can see over here. So off-chain agent sensor 142 in figure 2 refers to off-chain agent 140 that includes the sensor 142, which is part of almost all circuitry. For example, cell phone devices and even plausibly the COVAX chip circuitry that receives information from an environment and generate percepts. Sensor 142 provides a trigger or percept to action picker 134, which applies conditions if-else statements. Second, let me just show this so that it's a lot more clearer. So these cross-references will tally with the other chapter that I'll be doing, another section on the hospital synapse, tier 1, tier 2 radio frequency. Because in order to have a sensor, which is part of circuitry, receive information, you will require the radio frequency. And you also need to require the radio frequency to transmit, not just receive. As you can see here, the sensor 142 in the JP Morgan pattern is to receive information from the environment, meaning maybe a radio frequency environment. But in order to transmit information, it will be from the antenna, for example, in brain or COVAX chip cells. So the JP Morgan document will then match a cross-reference with, say, the hospital synapse section that I'll be doing using radio frequency tier 1 and tier 2. So sensor 142 provides a trigger or percept to action picker 134, which applies number one conditions. So this conditions is computer logic, if-else statements, and second is properties to select one or more action for each trigger condition met. And the third point is that if more than one trigger condition can be met, then more than one action can be taken. So in other words, you can see that this more than one options are like programmable options. You can add unlimited number of actions that you can think of, that the programmer can think of, and put it inside the program code and carry out all these logic steps. So this is what the document is trying to explain. And therefore, an unknown agent 125 actuates the actuator 144 to execute the selected actions. And I insert the word unknown because then it will be part of the GDPR law, because then nobody actually knows. And so it will be just, it contravenes the GDPR, which also excludes all this. It is the huge gap that was omitted of the finger tag law. Finger tag law, data protection law, a lot of laws. So it actuates the actuator 144 to execute selected actions. It is stated that sensor 142, so you can take a look at sensor 142, which is here. And the sensor is, as already mentioned, it is inbuilt into almost all electronic devices, including if you get a COVAX chip. It is plausible that the sensor is there as well. So sensor 142 can be deployed to off-chain agent 140 or to on-chain agent 130. Let's look at Oracle 143. What is the meaning of Oracle 143? It is stated that sensor 142 can be provided with Oracle 143, and both can be deployed to on-chain agent 130 and off-chain agent 140 in an Oracle-like model where Oracle 143 calls directly into the percept contract on-chain. So how this can be explained is that this so-called mysterious Oracle agent is able to look into a crystal ball as a metaphor of metal synapses. For example, I'll be explaining using the IBM neural grid, gating variables of population 100 plus ionized membrane potentials of memory chains and future intents chain in contract formation in favor of the company that thought of this and is able to intercept. It is also stated that the plurality of agents 125 can be used if necessary or desired. So for instance, one agent 125 deployed per account. This are just some mere extensions of what and why you require more than one agents 125. So because there are many accounts, so for example, one agent 125 can be deployed per account or per client basis, or he could be deployed for multiple accounts or multiple clients. Furthermore, the agent 125 is organized according to accounts types, and then there's a list of all the financial products, which are all computerized digits. Can name it as anything: nostril, deposit, non-account bearing, coin. Although it is incorrect to use the word, it's not accurate. It's not that it's incorrect. It is not accurate. It's not an accurate word to use stable coins. But anyway, this is the reason why it is called like they name it anything. But it's actually non-stable. So non-stable coins, which is the entire BIS central banks, unstable tokenized, non-fungible tokens, NFTs for short, non-interest-bearing coin deposit denominated in other currencies are all computer-generated accounts and they are not money. But nonetheless, let's talk about this concept that this document is trying to explain. The designer of Agent 125, master puppet, or the false architect. One or more properties for Agent 125 is identified or designated as a mutable or immutable based upon the explicit choice of the designer of Agent 125. So the designer is, for example, a programmer, And for example, he deposits accounts that Agent 125 controls for expansion or shrinking over time as is necessary or desired, which is against the American law, for example. Because you cannot use microchipping as monetary policy over an entire nation. And at the individual level as well, you cannot sell like products directly that way to any individual. And updating our properties based on changing needs. Okay, finally, the 4 categories of agents, actions type. There are 4 categories. They can fall into 4 categories. The first is to modify the agent's own properties. So this obviously refers to programming a programmable robot. Second is modify the properties of other agents. So for example, if you were to chip Synapse, initially a human being, but somehow turned robotic, being able to dial or compute other chip Synapse turned robotic beings. The third category is update the agent's decision rules. So again, this refers to programmable updatable robot. And 4, issue instructions to actuators classified as change agents that can affect non-agents. And finally, as mentioned earlier, it is stated that once the agent 125 reaches its end of life, it has the ability to nix call and then self-destruct. This is not a modification of agent 125's properties, but a modification of its entire environment, because agent 125 is entirely removed from it. So what it's saying is that once you remove one agent, it's not just the missing of one agent 125, it is a modification of the entire virtual environment EMV machine. Some examples listed include interest rate optimal sweeps. And the event listener 145 can listen to a messaging bus for an event that meets one or more trigger condition and outbound message bus API 146. And with that, I've ended the discussion on Sandbox cross-reference with JP Morgan document, attempt to explain what it can possibly mean. Now we can look at the next JP Morgan document, which attempts to explain space-based transactions. So this diagram here would be very clear to anyone now that in this JP Morgan document, systems and methods for privacy in distributed ledger technologies, that you can see in this is a very excellent diagram, although it's very simplistic. It's too simplistic, but it is a very clear diagram. The basic it encompasses everything that a basic understanding of what it means. It is very clear that you see the financial institution logo 140. You see human beings that could be CO-VAX chipped circuitry. So you can easily do a land scan over the continents, as well as the radio frequency emitting from antennas in brain from the CO-VAX chip. And you can see all these satellites that are being locked on as well, circling around the Earth. And buildings and financial institution, which is why you can see the dollar sign on the financial institution. It's very clear, right? You can see that the financial institution, but I think in this case it's slightly different because the financial institution could be in outer space. This is why you see this in the orbit outside of the Earth, because there's the dollar sign on the financial institution on land, continents, but this is in outer space. So this discloses a method for conducting space-based transactions whereby the first satellite provides a service to the user, but this user finds that it is incapable of service provision. So then it identifies one or more satellites available to provide in order to execute transaction with the second satellite, and hands over the service to second satellite, which then begins to provide the service to the user, and upon confirmation, transfer payment exchange, and both satellite communicates transaction data balances to the respective Earth base station. So it may not necessarily be explicitly stated, or the patent writer didn't even thought of it, but when I look at the document, I would just interpret according to what I see and what I perceive as plausible. So this is like a possible, the example that I just gave could be a plausible extension of because these circuitries, they work in space as well. In fact, there is some document stating that it was taken from space. It was just a prototype from space and was just copied. And a lot of this mapping, I have already given some basic briefing on a lot of these maps that were copied, all these logos that were copied, chips that were copied were just base maps, simplified version. These are ancient replicas. So it is just copied, meaning it is not original invention, it's just copied. And also why they all look the same, because it is the same space address. The planetary systems, constellations address is the same. That's why you see that it is the same all the time. The replica cannot change. Okay, so this one is just to show that this is the flow. This is just talking about in the instance where the transaction didn't go through, they would have this pattern is merely just talking about the ability to quickly switch to another satellite to facilitate the transaction. But also for me to point out that the lens scan will be able to scan anything with emitting signals from antennas, including in-brain if your person is CO-VAX chip with circuitry in-brain. And of course, off buildings, which is why they want to barcode the buildings, as well as the occupants inside the buildings. And also it does a lens scan at the same time with cable wires. Okay, let's just quickly look at the enclaves or quorum, which is part of the Ethereum Alliance, Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And here it is the JP document that I pick again. I think this is the third and the last document I'll pick for JP Morgan, Systems and Methods for Privacy and Distributed Ledger Technologies. Just wanted to show that you can see very clearly here that there is a TX, which is the transmission request. So if the chip is in-brain, you use the radio frequency to transmit the outgoing data. So there is TX is short for, it can mean transaction, but it can also mean the transmitter transmission. Those as RX will be like receiving data, so TX will be transmitting data, and you use radio frequency. But it can also mean like a basic transaction, purchase of an item, sale of goods and services. So this is like usage of Quorum and Ethereum. So it is computer toolkit, so computer language, so computer binary. So it could be radio frequency transmission. And also because like you see the word decryption, so there will be algorithm encryption and decryption and crypto logic. Okay, maybe we can just move on to the next one. So this one I pick is American Express as a cross-reference. So again, we are still under the Computer Bank of England discussion because, as I mentioned, it is a brochure, and there's two documents I already mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. That first is the Computer Bank of England document, which is I directly extracted the diagram, and I explained in the previous video, and also it contains brief descriptions, much like a brochure. And the second document was from the BIS. They can name it any city. They could even design it outside the city. So the city was London. And then the BIS also provide the Innovation Hub London provided this document, which I cross-reference on the word programmability, which I explained using the JP Morgan as a cross-reference, which didn't appear inside the Computer Bank of England brochure, neither did it appear in the BIS brochure. It was merely an attempt to cross-reference to explain what it can possibly mean by the word sandbox, Ethereum, virtual machine, and some of the other concepts that I've already discussed, like quorum. And so now I picked the American Express to explain as a cross-reference, deploying a cloud-based system using distributed ledger. So because in this case, we are moving on with the brochure itself, which contains short descriptions. So in the brochure itself of the Computer Bank of England model, it also speaks of smart contracts and Ethereum model. So then, of course, if it's very short, then nonetheless, it contains some info with key description. So I already taken this out and placed it inside my document. So then, of course, the next step would be to consider what then can smart contracts and Ethereum mean. So I'm going to cross-reference and explain using the American Express model. So smart contracts, generally it refers to automation of business logic. And of course, the word logic here will refer to computer logic. And the computer logic is programmed, so there will be predetermined terms and conditions, and for example, used by permissionless blockchain technologies such as Ethereum, which is explained in the previous video. And in the smart contract, the contract terms are specified in the form of a program, which states the terms and the parties involved. The funds required for the translation to execute are earmarked, and the payment will execute only when the terms of the smart contract agreement are met. Examples of smart contract functionalities to enable the PVP and the DVP within the CBDC computerized digits computer banks ecosystem. So the Ethereum model of virtual machine, you can see here, this is an alternate diagram by the American Express. It includes a smart contract, deployment of smart contract to perform various operations. System correlation invocation comprises of a first participant identifier associated with a first participant system and software repository identifier. Transmit the software repository identifier to a cloud provider. Upon receiving the software repository identifier, the cloud provider retrieves a system software associated and executes the system to deploy cloud-based system to the cloud program and write a system correlation to a distributed ledger 101. So for example, system 100 is here. Right, this whole thing is the system 100, and the comprises of the first participant system 1301. You can see here. And this is not the only participant system, right? You can see like there's 1301, 2, and up to n number of participant system. Each blockchain node, for example, computer processor application specific integrated circuits, ASIC, or the COVAX chip circuitry, it's also a circuit. Communicate with one or more blockchain nodes to validate write blocks, achieve consensus based on proof of work, proof of stake, practical Byzantine fault tolerance, and other suitable consensus algorithms. The consensus participants write the deployment smart contract 105 to distributed ledger 101 to achieve consensus and then transmit a write confirmation. So remember in the previous video, I showed that there's a read-write confirmation in the IBM document blueprint and the Computer Bank of England blueprint, which are both computer chips. So it speaks of a permission blockchain consortium, which procures a public key and a private key from a third-party certificate authority. Examples can include DigiCert, VeriSign. The private key is stored with each respective participant, for example, Synapse chip, because suppose I already explained that the sensor is inbuilt into almost all electronic devices. So the COVAX chip is a circuitry, and if there's it's like a mini cell phone. So if there is sensors inbuilt into the microchip, then of course the private key is stored there. And the date is encrypted with the public key. The public key will be something that it is just placed on the public domain. And prior to writing the distributed ledger 101, you'll be able to use a hierarchical deterministic high-definition solution to enable the creation of one or more child keys from one or more parent keys in the hierarchy. These are just the same concept repeated over and over again, just using different, so it might not be very accurate to use the word parent or child. Perhaps it will be the standard to use private and public key. So distributed ledger technology 101. So does it appear here? Just let me describe a little bit more and then I'll just move on to the next. So under this HD high definition tree of public addresses, there'll be one or more smart contracts. The system 100 will autonomously govern the deployment of cloud-based systems and smart contracts 105, which you can see here, written in programming language. So I wrote down some examples so that it is proof that it is just it is computer programming language written contracts. That is the meaning of smart, meaning that it is simply refers to programming language. It's synonymous. The word smart is synonymous with programming language. So, for example, Node.js, Java, Kotlin. So you can write the data to the distributed ledger DL with a predetermined format based on predetermined function parameters passed by API call. Second, deployed or invoked by a cloud provider 110. Third, invoked by one or more participant systems 130. You can see over here up to n number. And using specific cryptographic keys to perform cryptographic operations, then you deploy the cloud-based systems 140, which is over here. You can see that it's cloud, and API 145. Right, so this is API. And you also see this API in the Computer Bank of England and the IBM blueprints. Okay, next, the ledger communicator is one or more application programming interface API and software development kit SDK. LC Oracle is also used to query distributed ledger 101, which is here, which I've already explained in the previous permissionless and permission blockchain in the previous video. And cloud provider 110, some examples would be Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Oracle, Verizon Cloud, and the cloud platform is 115 here. So these are the company brands, for example. The cloud 115 is configured to provide infrastructure, could be with reference to InfraChip, which is InfraChip existing infrastructure of entire tier 1, tier 2, or global recruits of all computer monies, which is not money actually. Computer monies is just computerized digits, legally and economically speaking. and architecture, because like in a computer virtual world, you can just press unlimited number of zeros, right? So that is not like economically speaking and legally speaking money, because that in itself already means that everybody can just print unlimited amount of monies as much as they can press unlimited number of zeros. So for example, like servers, operating system, virtual machines, networks, and storage. So of course I will be just also showing some of the legal recommendations I'll be making at the end of this entire documentation. Let's look at the next diagram under American Express. Figure 2 discloses a registering system. So of course, like this can also explain like I think I will just talk about some other legal issues in some other, but for now we just focus on how it works. So it discloses a registering system for deploying cloud-based applications method 201, which you can see here. You can even have some remote, it may have no connection, but it may have some connection, for example, event 201, comprised of a cloud provider 110, connection with distributed ledger 101, registration process or blockchain registration process, assign a cloud provider identifier, blockchain address with public key and private key paired to cloud provider 110. Deploy a smart contract 105, generation or deployment of smart contract by programming all or a portion of the deployment smart contract 105 by interacting with software configured to generate the pre-programmed smart contracts. So you will start to realize that in the end, whomever is doing the programming and whoever controls the programmer will be like have some kind of illegal access to the nations in that sense. So that's not legal. So let's look at the API call 502. Okay, not sure if it's here, but yep, okay, so let's just move on to the API call 502. What is an API call? You see this API in the Computer Bank of England model, in the blueprint and in the IBM blueprint as well. But we want to understand what is API call. So API call, cross-reference using American Express, they attempt to explain it in terms of validating the MAC token, which is a number generator, which by extension can be the COVAX circuitry chip because it does generate the MAC emitting numbers and it's radio frequency transmission. So the cloud provider 110 validate the API call by validating the MAC token or JWOT token, JWOT. This is to ensure the API call originates from the participant system 130, which can be like, you can see that it's up to an unlimited number and participant system. So the limit of this participant system, it depends on what kind of system. Like if you talk about like entire region, like European Monetary Union, they call it a system as well. So then you can see that it's like a number system. I'm not saying that it is, but I'm just saying that this participant system, it's because this is just a basic blueprint. It's not like a example specific. The examples you have to think and apply. So since it is already COVAX, Synapse population 100 plus with MAC media access controller generating numbers, radio frequency transmission. So it can be technically be part of a system. And so if there are like there's this, yeah, of course it's not consensual and they're not willing, if it's, let's say, suppose you can get them to do an API call originating from the participant system, invoked by deploying API 145 that comprises of a participant identifier MAC number, or it could be willing. Like, for example, there are some people that could be willing to be part of a monetary system, for example, because maybe he's an investor and he wants to buy something. So it is possible that his personal MAC identifier is retrieved, for example. So the API call functionality includes, for example, parameters, but I will insert also the possible word bodily parameters, which will be explained using under the hospital synapse section. The bodily parameters recorded in the database in the deployed system 140, and then operations functionalities and performing using the deployed system 140. So you can see here, the cloud deployed system 140. And I already listed the company brands. So the cloud provider 110 is here. I'm going to talk about this now. It verifies the provider identifier from the API call, invoke the deployed smart contract 105, which is here, and to verify the participant identifier, for example, cryptographic processes standard to blockchain technologies, and then return to the cloud provider 110. A verification passed response. The cloud provider 110, which is here, generates the API call event, transmit the API call event to deployment smart contract 105. So you transmit an API call event to the deployment smart contract 105 to invoke a smart deployment of a smart contract 105 to write the computer write the API call event written to the distributed ledger 101. The deployment smart contract 105 can transmit a decommission request notification to the cloud provider 110 to decommission or deactivate the deployed API 145 and or deployed system 140. To summarize, the API call event comprises of API call functionality, second API call result, success or fail, and 3 participant identifier. So let me just show what are some of the companies that can be this is mentioned by the American Express as an example, would be like technical specifications of electronic communications. You can see here that I wrote down some examples 1 to 9. Wireless protocol. Yeah, you need a bus protocol, Ethernet, IEEE, ISDN, Integrated Services for Digital Technology, DSL, Digital Subscriber Line, Wi-Fi, there's wireless communications protocol using short wavelength, UHF, ultra high frequency radio waves, IEEE, Bluetooth, IEEE, Zigbee, Alliance, cellular protocol, infra protocol, optical protocol, internet packet exchange, AppleTalk, IP6, NetBIOS, OSI. Encryption, okay, so I divided it so it's clear, right? So like, because like you'd be thinking, okay, so who's going to do the encryption? So here's some examples. The key is for nations to understand how it works. And then for nations to submit their own version and their own citizens' ownership, not by any random person that will be monopolizing and controlling all the monies in the world and into his own pocket. That's the whole idea. So encryption will be two-phase, blow-phase. Some examples are written here. That is referenced also by American Express. And network communications, SHA series, cryptographic methods, and elliptic curve cryptography, and other post-quantum cryptography algorithms. So this is American Express, and we will move on to the third one, which I picked is Microsoft. So you can see here that the Microsoft Ledger Independent Token Service. Figure 1, what is it? It's an architecture for Ledger Independent Token Service 100 implemented as a cloud-based service running on computer systems in the public domain. So because this is by Microsoft, so they will be using Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS cloud computing environment, whereas private can refer to on-premise or hybrid cloud computing environment. So there are 4 main functions under token service 100. See here, this is the token service. Okay, let's just very quickly run through some of the key components. In the top area, you have the client interface CI-104. So can just see here is the client interface 104, and it's called the user interface. And there is an application programmatic interface 108. You can see over here. And resonates with the WB programmatic approach because it says here, right? Programmatic interface. If this programmatic interface is an external device, it has a sensor and it can transmit radio waves. But if it is in brain, it can do the same thing. So it can do programmatic approach in brain. Technically speaking, CI is a user-facing part of token creating new deployment on a distributed ledger network 118. So there is a 118. Yeah, right. Distributed ledger network. Transactions, transferring, managing, minting, burning tokens. So this is no different from a computer game, right? Like children, they play games and they will be like mining for gold, minted coins inside the computer game. There's a user interface 106 of custom client interface 104 implemented as a web-based portal, and liquid crystal display LCD, which is supported by the medical evidence of CO-VAX injectables, drawing out a microscopic slide. So LCD is the display subsystem, or it can be an organic light emitting diode capable of presenting 2D or 3D imagery. Then there is the API 108. Application programming interface, which I've already mentioned, of the client interface 104. It's implemented as a message-based API that receives requests and returns responses in the form of message payloads. Then in the middle area, there is secrets and account management component 110 and token management component 112. The secret and account management 110 handles functions of token service 100. Per account cryptographic metadata, for example, public and private keys used for signing or log-on authentication user logins. Retrieving cryptographic metadata for authenticated users and submitting the transactions to distributed ledger networks 118. The user need only log into token service 100 to access all of its cryptographic keys across multiple different distributed ledgers or separate distributed ledger wallet, or more accurately, electronic wallet applications. And at the bottom area, the proxy layer, which is 114, distributed ledger technology proxies 1161 all the way to M, connected to distributed ledger network 118 here. And I wrote down, as you can see here, in the Computer Bank of England, the characteristics include smart contracts and Ethereum model. So just just look at this control functions and figure 2. Figure 2 is the workflow for creating a token. This is very technical because there is a very basic explanation of token, which I will be just reading out and explaining more clearly, backed up by the Bank of Japan governor. That token merely just refers to a store of value, but I would just also insert and explain that it is a store of digital, computerized digits or digital value. It is not money. And here it's just a deeper explanation in terms of how it looks like in a computer system, that inside the computer game, it's like a computer game, right? This computer's game system, a token is a representation of a physical or a digital asset. In other words, a computerized asset. So like in a computer game, there's unlimited number of zeros or unlimited number of mining of gold that can be completed. So it is a digital asset. It's exchanged between participants of the distributed ledger network. And a number of different examples can be considered as digital assets. For example, commodities, financial instruments, for example, bonds. But it is just computerized digits, which, of course, is the legal issue. Because then it will be a group of people playing computer games, and they'll be pressing a lot of zeros for themselves, and they will be able to cash out this amount of zeros to purchase actual physical assets. So the computer system provides the user token templates where each corresponds to a type of physical or digital asset, which of course legally and economically is not an asset, is programmable. And each token template defines a set of attributes or control functions. Here, it is clearly programmable. So the purpose of putting this table one is to show that it is computer functions. You can see here very clearly that the fungible asset with variable supply, and these are all the control functions that you see here. Remove the mint or mint. You can like click mint, and then you'll be able to mint a new quantity of tokens, or these are all the functions. These are all computer functions like balances, transfer, but most importantly at minter, mint a new quantity of token, mint a specified amount desired, for example, and press many zeros. So in short, it's no different from playing a computer game, except that they will be able to translate the digital numbers to, if it's like trillions of dollars, they will be able to use this trillion amount to purchase unlimited amount of properties, for example, or even land and, things like that. So it is clearly stated that the users transact and manage tokens through a common interface by a ledger-independent token service. A message-based application programming interface API accepts and controls the messages for the token transfer and generate a payload submitted to the distributed ledger network and perform the payload into a format understood by the distributed ledger network or the program designer, for example. Right, let's look at the next. So this is the Computer Bank of England model, and we are now going to move on to look at some other characteristics listed in the brochure. So the characteristics, we've covered quite a number of characteristics, nearly all the characteristics mentioned in the Computer Bank of England brochure. So we're continuing on. Here is the next 3 characteristics: locking mechanism, earmark funds. Third one is hash lock, and fourth one is avalanche. So the Computer Bank of England document shows the locking mechanism that users use to earmark funds on the ledger through the API application programming interface. So you can see over here. Here is the application programming layer or API layer. The funds will be locked until a predetermined condition has been met. And these conditions can include, for example, you set a time period, or second, you set a cryptographic secret provided to the contract, or third, you design a predetermined number of signatures required to release the lock. In other words, a multi-signature electronic wallet. Four, you decide to put questionable, quote unquote, trusted third parties, because these third parties would be anyone. For example, indicate that the agreed condition had taken place. So then you see that there is a PIP and the ESIP to facilitate and orchestrate the functionality and subject to the end user. Again, could be any perp, self-titled B, perp, permission to instruct locks on the core ledger. So this figure 8 is the Computer Bank of England. It is taken from the sample. You can see here at the bottom where my cursor is pointing, Project Rosalind from the BIS, which is the so-called Criminal Innovation Hub, with not much blueprint actually, because this is very much like a brochure. And I took all this in-depth explanation by cross-referencing other company brand names that did not appear in this brochure at all. I was merely explaining some of these key terms like locking mechanism, earmark funds, and previously I've already explained some other concepts like programmability and Ethereum virtual machine or sandbox. So these brochures only contains 1-2 very useful illustrative diagrams and also very short descriptions for each of the key characteristics inbuilt into the Computer Bank of England. So here it is. The PIP and the ESIP that will orchestrate the functionality subject to the end user, questionable person, permission to instruct the locks on the core ledger. So the external payment interface provider, short form is ESIP, is external. They will host contract logic on the infrastructure, short for the infra chip that I will be talking about in the judgment, because it is a void bill that will instruct the release of funds through the API to the core ledger. Because this infrastructure bill can, as already mentioned at the beginning of the video, can have several connotations simultaneous at the same time. It is infra chip of the existing illegal tier 1, tier 2 containers of all the nation's money, so to speak, including the employees inside tier 1, tier 2, and also the other meaning can also be an infrastructure land thieves versus the legitimate citizens of every nation's offspring, eternal land that cannot be touched. This forbidden land that land thieves are targeting, so then it will be pocketed by their offspring. And also the third meaning is that it's a free flow infrastructure, meaning, for example, using satellite radio frequency, the thieves will be stealing electricity, so to speak, or they will be stealing, because they use electricity and electronics to steal a percentage per transaction. So essentially, they're stealing electricity, or they're stealing radio frequency, or they are stealing what is transmitted from using satellite, for example. So these are some of the things that I will be addressing in a table summarized as some of the legal recommendations for nations, selected nations that also have been targeted by this infrastructure free flow of electricity, radio frequency. Okay, let's just explain some of the concepts. One of three concepts here is, you can see at the bottom, locking, number one. Second, year mark. And the third one is hash lock. Okay, so I will just very quickly explain what are the meanings. So under year mark means you put conditions when the funds can be released. So again, subjects to the programmer. And the programmer is an unknown person. It could be any person. And second is programming the earmark funds to only release the payment when a linked account event has completed the stage or conditions. So then he will be manipulating you, he'll be manipulating monetary policy at the national level, the entire COVAX nation. So that is illegal, that's unlawful. The earmark funds locks expiry. So again, there's this very big legal question of expiry time, because then it will already, it's by itself proof that it is not money, because there is no store of value. You cannot accumulate and store wealth based on your hard work. There will be an expiry dictating when you must spend all the money. Then there's hash lock contracts. That's the third concept. Hash lock contracts, it is used by cryptocurrencies, which I will be explaining in detail in a separate section, can, for example, use multi-signature transactions. So it is also clearly stated, a key point made by the Computer Bank of England brochure, that the controller can execute the functionality of the locking with expiry time. So it is explicitly stated. Hash lock resonates with the 666 pattern, which I will explain, because it talks of cryptocurrencies. That particular pattern is cryptocurrencies is a e-reward system based on bodily vectors and parameters compute. Avalanche is the last concept. So Avalanche is a popular, okay, I will just put the word questionable to the next to the word popular, aims to segregate the smart contract. As I already explained, the word smart just means computer programmer. You are subject to the computer programmer. It is not smart. Smart contract platform from the core transaction ledger. This architecture requires multiple ledgers to be hosted. For example, processing transactions that exchange assets. We're talking about computerized assets, the ability to press many zeros, and payments for hosting smart contracts. So the Avalanche model, the EMV model, is used for the not smart contract platform and enables some interoperability with Ethereum. Already explained the Ethereum virtual machine, which is only, I believe it's just only one type, or it's only one type, and I explained one type of the Ethereum virtual machine. It's not because Ethereum is actually a computer toolkit, so it's just a programming tool. Programmable range API access to locking mechanism on the core ledger, PIP, ESIP of ledger. So the UK CBDC is interested. Okay, let me just put a conditional. These are all opinions of the person that wants to implement this. So it doesn't mean the rest of the world is very interested. But it just states that in providing the API access to simple primitives such as locking mechanisms, and so on and so forth. Let's look at the next. Let's look at the next concept, which I picked is the IBM permission lock contracts in blockchain networks, or the unspent transactions operations, UTXO, freeze operations. In the IBM pattern, the lock contracts in blockchain networks in Figure 1 shows process 104. So it is a computer processor that execute machine-readable instructions 118 to put a freeze operation on both blockchain 106 and blockchain ledger 10. 8. So you can see here that this is the blockchain ledger 108, and blockchain is 106. These are all very useful alternative diagrams, cross-reference from different company brand names. It did not appear in the Computer Bank of England at all. It's just merely to explain some of the keywords like UTXO that appears in the brochure. Let's look at the next diagram. Computer scripts used in log contracts. This is what it looks like, or defined by IBM permissioned log contracts. For the UTXO operation, here it shows an example for proposed swap or swap tokens. And I already explained tokens, the basic meaning just means a store of computerized digits value, programmable. So this is just a flow. You can see very clearly that the words you can see very clearly, and then like if not, these are like programming logic. If not, it will refund. If not, there will be payment, and then it ends. So these are the flow for the computer logic program into the not smart contract. Because the word smart, just the accurate meaning of that just means it's subject to the programmer. The programmer input what is the logic flow and what are the computer logic that it expects the machines to follow. Here is another example of a logic flow of the free slot tokens, store of computerized digits. This is an explicit example for the swap contracts. That's why it is called a swap operation. You can see here. And then after that, it was the store of value, which is another word for in other words, token claim. And then you can see that at the end of the computer logic flow, whether to complete the swap or refund to both parties, and then it will end. Okay, so here again is more diagrams, a clearer idea of what UTXO operations can mean in the Computer Bank of England brochure. So here you can see that there's a addition of a new block to distributed ledger 420. So this is a new block. It's added to the distributed ledger 420. You can see here that there's a world state, and the clients will submit transactions to the blockchain nodes 411. Here are the nodes. It's just this is the same concept repeated over and over again. You have seen this already in the IBM permission and permissionless contracts by the other writers. It could be depicted in a different, instead of a rectangular, it could be like a person, it could be a circle, but it all works on the same blueprint actually. So it is just cross-reference, and it shows clients submitting their transactions to blockchain nodes 411 to 413 with a plurality of blockchain peers to endorse, verify, and validate, and then commit the transactions to distributed ledger 420 here. And the blockchain 422 is here. You can see it's structured as hash link blocks, and I'll be explaining the hash of the parameters and vectors in the Microsoft 666 European pattern, where each block contains a sequence of n transactions. For example, data blocks 423 to 430, which is where when you enlarge this new data block, it looks like this. And I believe I already explained something very similar. So blockchain 422 is a transaction log structured as hash link blocks with a sequence of n transactions generated by adding a hash of a prior block's header, and all transactions on blockchain 422, which is here, are sequenced and cryptographically linked. Then you get figure 4b, which stores transactional information of n transactions from 1 all the way, for example, to 10, 100, 500,000, 2,000, 3,000 within the block data 450. You can see over here. The new block data 430 is here, includes a link to the previous block, chain 422. This is the previous link. So the block metadata 460 is here. It stores multiple fields, for example, byte array. It is all computer digits. Okay, let's look at the next concept here. Figure 4C shows a blockchain 470. So this is the blockchain 470 for digital content with a hash value used as a reference basis to the previous block and is associated with digital content encrypted. To access the digital content, you must decrypt each block and use the hash value as a reference basis. And the blockchain store and encrypt the hashes of the content of each block, and the digital content will be stored in a storage area memory address, including, for example, the COVAX circuitry. That is the digital content. All right, the next concept is actually continuing on with the Computer Bank of England. Moving on will be, you can see here, interoperability, the next two concepts. Interoperability and OS kernel. I will be explaining using what I picked, which is Sprint, which is T-Mobile. Software app lock activation sequence using permission-based connection to the network. So this is a cross-reference. All these company brand names are picked, and by what I see fit in explaining in much greater detail what the short brochure in the BIS and the Computer Bank of England, these two documents with short descriptions and useful. The descriptions are useful, but it's short. It's more like a brochure, and there are some useful illustrative diagrams. So I'm cross-referencing the meaning of interoperability as one of the characteristic and the other characteristic OS kernel using Sprint or T-Mobile. So the Computer Bank of England, which is 0.6 in its brochure, talks on interoperability with bank-in deposits. They propose to use account payment infrastructure and to integrate with the existing payment infrastructure, electronic wallets or digital store of value wallets, or in short, CBDC. They might use account or a short code alias. Interoperability with cash and contactless IBM software hardware kernel CBDC use. The Computer Bank of England document on kernel explains that in order for the CBDC payments to use existing infrastructure chip, the point-of-sale smart device will require contactless kernel. A kernel is a piece of self-contained software that provides payment acceptance devices with the necessary functions to process contactless transactions. 4 possible options explored for kernels. The first being the CBDC contactless kernel. These are very short descriptions from the brochure that I extracted. I only took out what is necessary, key, crucial descriptions, as well as the useful illustrative blueprints, but they are not the technical blueprints themselves because it is just a small, short brochure. And none of these company brand names appeared inside this Computer Bank of England and the BIS. I merely cross-referenced to explore in detail what it can possibly mean. So these are one of 4 possibilities for the feasibility study which is to develop a CBDC contactless kernel, right? For example, like wave transmission, license a white label kernel. You can see again, all these are very brief descriptions. There's nothing much you can read from it except the word kernel, which then can be cross-referenced with technical blueprints. Use the implementation of the proposed EMV contactless. Again, there was no description of what EMV is, for example, and I used JP Morgan to explain. And that writer himself was just merely explaining what he believes is achievable or applicable, and known as kernel, and license an existing payment network kernel. So these are just very short descriptions. But let us just cross-reference with the Sprint or T-Mobile, and this is what it looks like. So the Computer Bank of England kernel and interoperability section will be supplemented with explanations using Sprint or T-Mobile. You can see here that the above diagram, figure 1, I've mentioned this before, it matches the kill switch, which is published openly by an Indian group journal on CO-VAX. And CO-VAX is under international criminal law, which is chip genocide, chip systematic crime, and chip war crime. Because in order for the CO-VAX radio frequency transmission to work, of course, a cell tower, cloud system, database, all these are part of the apparatus setup. And also instructions to invoke an application programming interface provided by the operating system to write the carrier memory, partition an API call, providing a key password associated with the carrier memory partition. See also Sprint 2 Tier RFID Hospital under pharmaceutical law section, which I will be explaining in detail. The cross-reference company like Microsoft, T-Mobile, T-Systems, European Gateway, and Sprint, as well as some of the telecommunications American law court cases, as well as the Kill Switch academic journal, in conjunction with many other journals submitted by various nations, explaining CO-VAX. So what is figure 1? Explained by Sprint. Figure 1 is a communication system 100 with communication mobile device 102, cellular radio transceiver 120, communications applications 108. It shows a base transceiver station 132. So 132 is what the court cases are all about. Because it is the people that do not want this to be erected versus the telecom vendors that want it to be erected for some reason. Perhaps they were being controlled by NASDAQ, for example. And also it is part of some agency programs. So these things have to be cleared out because the facts have to be laid out, because it is possible that the paid agencies, they may or may not have understanding. So it is important to just lay that out first. So this is the base station transceiver, BTS, and there's a communication device 102 that communicates with BTS 132 through wireless link. And there is a variety of wireless communication protocols, and some of which I'll be explaining using some of the advanced technology shared, which is why I will also be explaining in other sections like the satellite lock-on, using different brand names in the world. That if they are in fact the perp, they will not be revealing their brand names. They will be doing DIY with no brands so that they cannot be arrested. So those that are willing to share, it's good. Those that are willing to explain what is code division multiple access, that is very good. So the wireless communication protocols will be CDMA, code division multiple access. The second one is long-term evolution, or LTE. And the third one is GSM, which is worldwide interoperability for, global system for mobile communications, that's GSM. For WiMAX, that is worldwide interoperability for microwave access, as well as other wireless communications protocol. So what happens here is that you can see very clearly in this diagram. Suppose a person is the communication mobile device 102. Okay, maybe it is not drawn here. Okay, yeah, so it's here. The mobile device. The CO-VAX in-brain is the mobile device. But suppose the person was not CO-VAX, that would be the external cell phone. But even so, even if he was not CO-VAX, he could have been microchipped in some other ways, for example, by ingestion, because there's the radio frequency waves in the environment. So this will be the mobile communication device 102 capable of transmission and receiving data using radio frequency. And I've already listed all the BTS-based transceiver station, which is revolving, which is what the court cases, telecommunications court cases were revolving around, using wireless link to any type of wireless communications protocols that I've already listed. And I will also be explaining in greater detail on the PowerPoint 9 on satellite lock on using all the cross-reference telecommunications company that I picked. So for example, the wireless link would be the communication mobile device 102 base station 132, aka your cell tower, which is the telecommunications vendors, the 56G, the T-Mobile USA, Nasdaq, IT System, Dutch Telecom trying to install with the blanket satellites, which I will explain in two separate, the telecommunication section and the satellites lock-on section. And it will couple with the mobile communication devices, which is 102 operable to communicate, meaning transmit data, with the wireless access point 142. It's drawn here, so it's AP, it's drawn here very clearly. And it will receive the activation payload and complete the activation process on the mobile communication device 102. So it is stated very clearly in this sprint document that the AP is anywhere. It laid out very clearly that it is anywhere. For example, it can be in a retail store, it can be in a residence, it can be in the workplace, it can be a corporate office. It's a wireless communication link to a device 102. Here. For example, Wi-Fi communication protocol or short-range radio communication protocol such as near-field communication or Bluetooth. Okay, we'll just quickly look at the activation payload, because this is what the consumers are very concerned about, right? The activation payload can be the kill switch payload, for example. So the activation payload 113 is delivered to the mobile communication device. But for now, let's just look at the technical aspects, because the biochemical aspects is in another section. So it's delivered to the mobile communication device 102 during an initial activation of the device. If the communication device 102, which is here, is reset, it's stated very clearly, reset, which is the word used by WEF, right? So if the communication device 102 is reset, it contains information or instructions for the completion of activation process delivered to the OMADM, short for Open Mobile Alliance Device Management Protocol, payload stored in the carrier memory partition 106. Here. You can see here, this is the carrier partition. A portion of the activation payload is stored in the SIM short form for subscriber identity module card, or SD secure digital card. Okay, on the right-hand side, this is figure 6A, and this is programmable Java applet 612. So figure 6A shows the software environment. The word environment, there's a lot of perp connotations surrounding it. I will also be explaining in the PowerPoint section 9 when I'll be looking at some of the space documents. So 602 is implemented by DSP 502 that executes operating system 604. You can see over here, this is the operating system software that provides platform. The operating system is coupled to and interact with AMS, short form for Application Management Services, which you see here is 606. This is Sprint's way of explaining. This does not appear in the rocket science documents. It doesn't appear in, these are all just cross-reference picked by me. That transfer control between applications running on mobile 400. Now, let's look at the crucial diagram. I want to state very clearly that this OS kernel did not appear in the Computer Bank of England at all. As I've already read out earlier, the Computer Bank of England contains very vague descriptions of the feasibility of what kind of kernel they will be implementing, and there was no specific blueprint at all. It is merely more like a brochure. So what I did was I picked Sprint as a cross-reference as to what a kernel can look like. So here it is. Figure 6b shows alternative software program 620 implemented by DSP 502, which executes operating software 628 kernel system and executes application 622 and application framework 624 that run on functionality through libraries 626. Okay, let's move on quickly to some of the concepts. Okay, we'll be using the visa pattern because of at least 3 reasons. Because the Computer Bank of Russia, they utilizes two out of three that are observed, the BIS and Bridge CBDC models. This is Computer Bank of England, not Computer Bank of Russia, not Bank of Russia. It's a Computer Bank of Russia. So it's virtual, it's online. The utilizes 2 or 3 BIS and Bridge CBDC models. This is what I noticed from the document stated and tested its interoperability of digital ruble with the Computer People's Bank of China, which I will be covering under the Computer Yuan section, PowerPoint 8. We are now at PowerPoint 11. So Computer Bank of China will be in greater detail in Computer Yuan section, PowerPoint 8. The BIS Innovation Hub HK. So HK is actually separate because it is EHK Electronic Hong Kong Dollar, which is different from the Computer Yuan. So it states that the Project M-Bridge refers to connecting economies through. Again, you can see that these are all very big language because there's no technical blueprint at all. It merely just repeat what the meaning bridge means, connect, but there is no clear explanation and in-depth blueprint of exactly what connects means. It can mean like, so it is too big, and it's also, again, for the Hong Kong brochure, it's just considered brochure. And they can call it any name, they can name the bridge anything. So the brochure is called Tenniel, Lion Rock to M-Bridge, for example. I don't think I will be explaining in detail this brochure. probably I will only have time to reserve it for the judgment because I've already covered too many documents and blueprints, and I only pick like for the BIS-Nordic and the Computer Yuan. So the Hong Kong one, perhaps I will just reserve it for some other documents. But I will be looking at a small portion of the EHK, electronic Hong Kong dollar, and the CBDC, Computer Yuan, and the connection to, they also try to chip the UAE, the Emirates, and also the Computer Bank of Russia, Model D, and the Computer People's Bank of China, which is not China. It's not China, and it's not for the people of China either. It's just merely a name. This is the reason why they are running a World City scam, assuming the identity of an entire population that have no say or involvement in taking their money. So the Enbridge will be supplemented with explanations, meaning I will cross-reference these very vague brochures on Enbridge, and I picked this visa pattern as a very good illustrative blueprint. So you can see it here. The legal meaning of Enbridge, of course, the false version, they will just use very vague words like connect, but generally the layman don't really get to see the computer blueprints, and so this is a very big term. So we have this cross-reference here from Visa to explain, and also it can also have some link with MC Bridge, for example. This is like a close match from what I've found. So it can have a link with MC Bridge, for example, but instead of MC Bridge, perhaps they call it M Bridge. It could be like a close blueprint. It can have like it can be quite different. It can be quite close. So MC Bridge is merchant customer bridge. And of course, in all the EMV, they are merchants, right? And they will require customers. So then there will be an MC bridge. So to illustrate this MC bridge, how does it work? It's quite easy actually, because it's just radio frequency transmission. But anyway, the customer registers his mobile smartphone. Okay, it need not be Apple iPhone. It can be just any electronic devices with a radio frequency transmission and reception. And these company brand names are just a way to illustrate how it can work. So the electronic wallet service is installed as the MC bridge, or MCB for short, the letter B for bridge. So it becomes MCB platform. So what happens is that this customer receives discounts information, because like the largest F&B are what the typical citizen may be consuming regularly. So then it is just an example. So the registered customer, meaning his cell phone has installed this MC bridge, which is the merchant customer bridge platform, he will automatically receive discount information, electronic coupons, offers, rewards. For example, a $2 Happy Meal on an SMS, or the MCB platform from an enrolled merchant, McDonald's. He walks into a McDonald's store and purchase the $2 Happy Meal by showing his electronic wallet information, swiping his MCB platform Max Strip card, engaging in near-field communications, contactless handshake through his smartphone. But of course, with the COVAX chip, which could be like a mini cell phone, then you can connect the dots and you can see what is the legal situation here. meaning there's like an automatic removal of tier 1 and tier 2, because then you'll be swiping the CO-VAX chip, microchip in brain. So let's just continue on with this MCB bridge. Now you can see very clearly with the visa pattern that Figure 1A shows the polarity of opt-in activities by tracking the customer's browsing history, in-store transaction history, shopping cart, wish list, his social media activities, his likes, his comments on a merchant list, or any of the social media and blog experiences that reflect his preferences and purchasing patterns that matches the merchant offers. So, for example, Tom, he tweaked his purchase of Starbucks coffee. It need not be Starbucks. Like I mentioned, that because it is like a percentage tab, it starts off with percentage tab of the to write off the largest F&B products in the world. So it's like the first targets in a way, because that's like a very large percentage ripoff. Like for example, using swipe cards or wave card or chipped cards. So you can see here that Tom tweets his purchase of Starbucks coffee on 118A, on social media activities 105A, which is captured by the MC Bridge platform that specializes in tracking customer behaviors. So the MCB platform contains this information about Tom's membership with Starbucks. And also because he added the Starbucks app, which is an e-card, installed on his electronic wallet, thus exhibiting his loyalty and also through his constant consumption habits tracked. So the MCB platform 120, you can see here, obtain the GPS coordinates of Tom through his smartphone, or, as you already know, perhaps the CO-VAX cell phone in brain, which the MCB bridge used to recommend offers from nearby merchant stores, for example, coffee outlet coupons matching his interest in coffee located close to his GPS. The MCB bridge 120 prompts matched offers 107 to his mobile wallet 108. Therefore, this MCB platform facilitates the enrolled merchant. So it goes both ways. It will go and approach the largest F&B, and then it also approaches the individual citizen X and collects information about his purchasing habits, his products references, and then the merchants, based upon they will start to design the targeted marketing promotions to facilitate loyalty, affinity programs, memberships, rewards, offers, 15% off invitation offer to attract first-time customers, 25% off loyalty offer for returning customers. It is a form of soft control of the citizen spending behaviors, and also it is a dispatch of computer money, which is not money. And it can be used for policy purposes, which is already stipulated as illegal by the American law, even including the Federal Reserve legislation amendment. So this is a concrete proof of policy capability, beginning with balance awareness and EMV contactless standards included in the Computer Bank of England. So still continuing on and almost completing all of the features in the Computer Bank of England, there is also another characteristic called balance awareness. It states that the user's balance could be stored on their smart device or remotely on the ledger. Okay, so let me just always use a model to so again, the WEF and the WHO, it's much like a brochure, but in the very small blueprint that I was able to extract from the WHO and the WEF VAX cert, which refers to the COVAX chip, you can see that in that diagram that I extracted, there is a CDCVM, which is not explained in detail, and so it is much like a brochure, although it is called technical specifications. So this CDCVM is part of what is being used to verify the user, for example, and cross-reference. So this WHO WEF is a cross-reference. It did not appear in the Computer Bank of England. This Computer Bank of Russia, you can see here very clearly, it's Computer Bank of Russia. It's not Russia, it's not Bank of Russia. It is Computer Bank of Russia. Model D is another cross-reference to try and explain this balance awareness offline. So let's just backtrack a little bit. The CDCVM in the tech guide brochure, which is actually a brochure, which is a brochure, it doesn't really have much technical details or any technical blueprint, but nonetheless, there's a useful short extract of an illustrative diagram containing the short form CDCVM and then with some numbers printed next to it. So how it works is that, for example, it can be using, because it is called the VAX cert, right? So it could be like the COVAX circuitry sensors chip in brain. Then it matches the IBM neurogrid gating variables of port 100 plus. That is more to do with the chemical aspects. And then the smart device can be the COVAX chip. Now let's just then look at this feature of the Computer Bank of England, how it can possibly work if it is offline transfers. Because this is a feature that is stated as a heading in the Computer Bank of England. So then you start to figure, okay, so how does it work offline? So I will cross-reference using a Computer Bank of Russia Model D as an illustration. Offline transfers are payments, for example, in digital rubles, made by clients without internet access. So they will require special electronic wallets on mobile devices, including their bodily cells. But let's just minus this part about in-brain bodily cells. Let's continue on. The offline transfers can be carried out using short-range wireless transmission. So this is the answer. That is how they do it offline. Meaning they will still have to use frequency waves, for example, Bluetooth or near field communications or NFC for short that you see here. Okay, let's just go back to the MC merchant customer bridge or the M bridge, cross-reference using the Visa pattern. When making payments offline, the sending client will enter the transfer amount and confirm the transfer. If sufficient funds are available in the sending client's offline wallet, the required amount of digital rubles will be transferred, and the Computer Bank of England, Russia has the capability to set the limits for offline transactions. A mechanism to recover the digital rubles in an offline wallet is possible if the mobile device is lost. So let's go back to this MCB bridge illustrated by Visa. in figure 1B, it shows the merchant consumer cloud 100B that obtains merchant store locations, inventories, information, website server ID or web address of merchant terminal ID. So the EMV can be already installed. And in other words, this is saying that the MC Cloud contains information of business accounts. So this is also, again, part of this, the table that I've drafted out concerning the business accounts, right? Because business accounts previously was inside a physical bank, but now it's more like electronic. All the information about the business owner will be known. So figure 2A, the consumer 202 possessed an electronic wallet 203 that comprises one or more bank accounts, for example, Bank of America checking account and a Chase credit card account, merchant membership account, Sam's Diner Club, and a registered MCB platform service account that process the payment request communicate with a financial network 230 to exchange financial data 233B to perform the financial transaction. This is the reason why the largest FMB and businesses have become redundant once they install electronic transaction infrastructure, so to speak. Because it has become the electronic cashier. So sort of slowly replacing the tier 2 and the tier 1, because the tier 1 is embodiment of all the tier 2s. And they target the largest FMB because it's like a large percentage ripoff. Let's look at some other useful diagrammatical depictions. So you can see here that Consumer 202's transaction record is updated upon redemption or offer matched by the MC Bridge platform. Right, this is like the side view, what it looks like. This is the consumer, right? Like this is like the computer logic. They will start to track, oh, did he receive the match offer? Did he redeem the offer? Yes, he did redeem. So then it will be updated transaction record on the MCB platform. And did they match the offer and redeem the offer on the merchant store? Right, so that's the point of sale is the electronic cashier, which initially the tier 2 will be ripping off a large percentage, but eventually will be replaced by the radio frequency owner, for example. So they have a knowledge store of all the merchants in the world. This is another useful illustrative diagram to show in terms of the nodes. So this is called the web clause of merchant information. Because like with the POS electronic cashier installed, if I own this computer program, I'll be able to look at the link between all the merchants in the world that is being installed on with the MC bridge, for example, in all the business accounts in the world. Very easy. So here is figure 5A, the MC Bridge Platform Server 520 that require the card to be compliant, first of all. And then the Financial Network 530, which is the card issuing bank, will provide a token, as explained, is a store of computerized digits. It's not money. Legally speaking, economically as well, it's just a computerized store of value. So the token 154A replacement for card information converted into tokenized PAN number 514B for Citizens Computer Wallet 503. So the Citizens Wallet is here. This point of sale, near field communications that do the transactions offline. MC Bridge platform server. You can see it very clearly. This is a computer server. This is the financial network, merchant EMV cards, all the tier 2 banks, issuer, they issue the bank that issued the card. So this can explain how all the business accounts, which is contained in the commercial banks tier 2 and tier 1, which in turn is an illegal container for the nation's money, so to speak, has become redundant because it has just been reduced to a computer chip of the existing illegal banking infrastructure. And the tier 2 is also being tempted to begin this by ripping off a percentage of, for example, supermarkets, groceries, the largest F&B, which is all the top sellers in the world. I think that was very good. All right, so all the top sellers in the world. And free write-off the largest F&B top sellers per industry at the terminal electronic cashier. Easily be able to see all the information using the web clause of merchant information. Bank account information wirelessly transmitted external platform run by an unknown electronic cashier. There's still one more diagram. This is again another diagram to look right at the 4 parties. Here the e-money or token, which is a store of digital value, is associated with the manufactured card. And now we can talk about the other feature in the Computer Bank of England, document on technical standards targeting interoperability electronic wallet devices. So it specifically stated that smart cards or plastic cards with integrated circuit chip, you can see here, but also it can refer to the chip population 100 plus that require a power source. So if it is COVAX chip, it will be bodily charge power with transaction value and added features like fingerprint scanners and keypads. So they will develop smartphone-based CBDC e-wallets and so on and so forth, but it can be a lot more advanced than this. Or it was just omitted after a brochure. Because if it's just like a computer run controller computation logic with satellite access and cell tower transmissions, and then you have all this, which I will discuss later, the different kind of cashier, electronic cashiers. This questionable interoperability is automatically solved because it's just the same Wi-Fi, sweeping the lens scan using satellite. They've automatically omitted tier 1, tier 2, so there isn't really much serious need for any kind of interoperability, so to speak. Okay, let's look at the final few concepts from the Computer Bank of England, which is briefly stated alliance design and interoperability. So the alliance design, it states that it's like they give some examples 1 to 5. For example, your mobile phone, PAN alliance, primary account number, short for PAN, account number wallet alliance, or I would just add on another one, which it did not appear in the Computer Bank of England, the COVAX number generator, in-brain transmission to cell towers documented by medical doctors. So here it is. I would choose the Bank of America as a cross-reference. The Bank of America did not appear in the Computer Bank of England. I merely chose this as a exemplary blueprint how it can look like as a way to explain the Computer Bank of England characteristics, alias, and interoperability. So here is the proof of alias data store in figure 7 and alias data depository interface in figure 6. So you can see here that this is all computers, chips, controller, because like in the short brochure, it merely mentions that, okay, there's going to be an alias design and some of the ways to explore what is this initial design for alias could be 1 to 4. The number 5 was omitted. And then I cross-reference with Bank of America. You can see that it is a computer chip for the alias data repository. There's a processing device. There's a memory. And there's a network communication. So like data transmission, for example. And then the alias data store. So clearly this is a computer with a computer chip, controller, memory, processor. And if we look at the financial institution, same thing, you'll start to see processing device. So it is the computer processor, the memory, the network server applications, the communication interface, which is radio frequency or transmission of data, and downloadable mobile app for P2P. In figure 8E, if the second user register the financial institution account and it starts to initiate a transfer in the mobile banking system, he will send using his alias, and the newly registered account information will be placed in the alias data repository. However, if we consider a final note that I will also be explaining in detail, the Microsoft WO666 pattern of bodily activity data of alias one-way hash. So that is also a kind of hash value that can be used by PIP to look up onto the electronic wallet to make subsequent payment, for example. Okay, so with that, I will just end this part and we can move on to a quick one of 11.4, but the more important part that I will want to focus on is actually the final part here, which is the criminally accurate version. Meaning, besides all these points that I've made about the COVAX chip, what are some other ultimate uses by the perp for this COVAX chip? It's the computer Synapse Pulse model, Bank of England. The criminally accurate version is I use the IBM model NeuroGrid for deployable inference as the ultimate criminally accurate reason for COVAX chip. So we'll just have a quick run over the next few slides, and then we will just look at the final answer for the NeuroGrid 100 plus for deployable inference and what is it all about. So here is the computation logic. You can see here that this is the meaning of pre-log. On the left-hand side, you can, maybe we'll just look at figure 7. I just want to have a quick one. This figure 7 is the meaning of pre-log and validation of payment transaction. It is by essential pattern, cryptologic self-executing blockchain export commitment, which shows an interoperable smart contract. Smart meaning just programmable contract or computer programs of digital contracts comprising of cryptologic committal, which contains a processor. So it is a computer, because a computer would just contain these few functions such as a processor. You can see the pre-commit authorization over here. This is the token data, which is the store of computerized digits. And the processor is a microprocessor, a microcontroller, application-specific integrated circuit, ASIC, a discrete logic, or a combination of circuits or logics. And this term, general term, that encompasses all these that I mentioned, processor, is under the GDPR law, which is omitted. And the memory would be the database, can be removable circuit boards, of the same or different programs. It is a store of memory database. There's a commit logic, so configured to cause the data receiver to commit the token data to the receiver blockchain. Encrypt. There's an encrypt function based on predetermined committal key, and there's a lock key. After sending the pre-commit, you receive a pre-commit acknowledgement and then lock the token data onto the data finisher blockchain. It's just... So system 11, let me just see system 11 here. Figure 11. So I'll just show it here. What is it? This is figure 11, processing capability of a system. Same thing, processor, memory, central processing unit, microcontroller, which is the controller stated inside the GDPR, but it is not explicitly detailed and explained in the GDPR law. There's an integrated circuit or specific application-specific integrated circuit, a digital signal processor, field programmable gate array, short form FPGA, parameters and other things stored and managed into a single database or memory. Right, so this is the interoperability smart contract, meaning I picked this essential because I wanted to give a visual illustration of what the Computer Bank of England characteristic on interoperability can mean. And also because Essential is located in England. It is by a group of French, Italian sounding people like Hugo Pons, Gassipe, Giordano, and Luca Ciatti. So that's the reason why I picked them. And of course, they have some connections that I'm aware of with some other banks. Right, so this is to illustrate interoperability, interoperable cryptologic blockchain. It does resemble, or is in fact what the Vexer was trying to explain in its brochure. Here it speaks of figure 1. You see here is distributed ledger technology 104 that provides certification. So it's like the VEX token. That is the tokenized store of value. And it's stated that certification or token data includes quote event proof corresponding to the token data. What is this? The keys that you see here. So these are identities that include IP address, MAC addresses, host name, usernames, other information that identifies the participant of the distributed ledger technology. The cryptological information is used to ensure the digital signature. So if it's a vexed from in-brain, then it is the digital signature in that sense, technically speaking, which appears in the VAX cert of WHO and WEF, and that I mentioned earlier on. It starts with the C, D, E. And here is the figure 12 showing interoperable cryptologic blockchain multiple distributed ledger technology. 102, 1202. This is the network, this is the participant. And it will be able to provide a cert, and that is why I picked this, because it states very clearly that the essential document states that it is trying to explain here in this previous diagram that it provides certification of the VAX. It didn't say VAX token, but it did say that it provides certification, and I would just expand to include that it is possible that the tokenized value, it did state very clearly certification of the token data stored in the blockchain, which includes an event proof. So let's just move on. The whole idea is just to give a good idea of interoperability feature in the Computer Bank of England, and also some aspects of cryptologic, which is just computer functions. Right, and the identities can include IP addresses, but it can include the MAC addresses, for example. So the distributed ledger technology, let's look at the final diagram here. An interoperable cryptologic blockchain with multiple distributed ledger technology includes interoperable participant with an MSP that exchanges public keys and identify information. In another distributed ledger technology that includes multiple interoperable participants, 1204, that include transfer initiators and transfer validations. Okay, so this is like some key diagrams that I selected that can possibly explain in more details what the meaning interoperable can mean in the Computer Bank of England. Now we move on to the final section and some of the answers. The criminally accurate version. So I picked this IBM memory map neural network accelerator because very clearly you can see here the word neural, and neural is in brain, or the brains. Accelerator for deployable inference systems. And because of the word controller, so the word controller is a keyword in the GDPR law, or data protection law. Because in this data protection law, the whole gist is that you want to protect data, but the data is being extracted from in-brain. So how do you protect yourself from data being protected from in-brain that is also capable of transmission and reception? So this microcontroller bus architecture, it also matches the bus architecture in the Microsoft 666 pattern. And I will also be explaining that. Let's just examine now the final portion, and then we will just end. Figure 9 shows the criminal system interconnect 902, which is a peripheral component interconnect express, or PCIe, small letter e for express bus, that conforms to an advanced microcontroller bus architecture, AMBA. such as the Advanced Extensible Interface AXI slave of a memory map neural inference engine connected through the system, which will be cross-referenced with WO666 Microsoft pattern, human body vectors and parameters computation logic modeled after the BAS architecture. The idea is also a criminal practice, for example, reusable clone soldiers or any kind of other slave labor, even underage, and documented in international space law. And here disclosed is a sample model, IBM, which can explain the criminal motive behind CO-VAX circuitry chip for not just IBM, it's in itself a replicated ancient chip space diagram. It's not just IBM, there's Intel, NeoGrid population 100 plus. Because you can see that this is all the individual chips for each brains organized into 100 plus nations. And you can see here very clearly the word parameters. So it matches the bodily cells 666 Microsoft pattern of parameters compute. That's the reason why they want to compute. And also I will also be explaining in the biochemical drug section on the biological and chemical aspects of how the gating variables or ionized membrane potentials can work. And you can see here, this is the API that you see in the Computer Bank of England, for example. This is the application programming interface. So here what you see is from another section that I will be just only very briefly touching on, explaining the 911 phenomenon, that what are some of the technology involved, so-called exotic technology. So one of which could be to do with time traveling, of course, anti-gravity, but time traveling teleportation technology, which is already being utilized. And you can see in movies, for example, Captain America. And here is an actual document by Holobeam, which is a very good document. I chose it. There's so many things inside Holobeam technology that can explain a lot of the things that I want to talk about. So here is just a brief extract. I'm not going to talk in detail. It is just to show the match between Holobeam technology, which is not really saying this company, but it's more on the technology itself, teleportation. Using holographic energy teleportation with time correlated standing wave interference, to match it with the IBM pattern of why they were computing you can see here the parameters, the vectors of the cells locked on of 100 plus synapse. All right, so this is just to give a close match, which will be explained very briefly in under Space Law PowerPoint 9. So now you can see very clearly here that the advanced microchip populations on brain with CO-VAX, microcontroller using a computer bus architecture AMBA system interconnect in comparison with the Computer Bank of England, and also because of some past historical records, like the location of IBM is always, which I will show very shortly, in some sporting addresses, and then they duped the 100 plus military in the Wuhan event. And also in the past, there's the construction B, and also the tier 2B. So placing these two blueprints side by side, you will see very clearly by now the answer, the IBM MM Neural Network Deployable Inference and Computer Bank of England, CBDC. These are just blueprints. On the right-hand side is a short brochure. On the left-hand side is just a sample, and it is a copied ancient replica. So I'm just merely using as cross-reference to explain the case. So you will come quickly to the conclusion that it is a match. And I will prove it to you with some evidence of the operational mathematical functions. So the IBM defines a neural network model comprising of the entire computations performed by a neural network. And of course, if you want to map the brains of all the humans in 100+ nations, you need to like have a tracking device. So one way is to use the graphene oxide and do a microchip. And then you get the neural net. You get the neural map, and then you get the neural map network. And for deployable inference, which includes, so what does this neural network of CO-VAX chip graphene oxide, for example, can include? It includes a graph of all the connections between what they are trying to achieve. For example, connections between the neurons, the weights, the activation function parameters, for example, for every nation documented in the computer. So the training modifies the neural network model to perform the perp desired function. Inference applies to the neural network as an input to generate an output without modifying the neural network model. So I was trying to explain what is the difference between training and inference, because you always hear these words about neural network. How do you train the neural network, and how do you, in this case, it's titled deployable inference. So you're trying to infer from the input. So let's look at very quickly the evidence of the perp's mathematical functions, because the mathematical functions is evidence of what the perp is trying to achieve. So you can see here, the legal meaning of a tensor is defined as a multi-dimensional array of numerical values, and each neural network layer is associated with a parameter tensor V and the weight tensor W, and the input data tensor X and the output data tensor Y, and an intermediate data tensor Z. So this is where you get the first equation, the perp's mathematical equation. So you see here, it is the evidence. A layer's output data tensor Y can be computed as in equation 1, where the neuron activation function is configured by the vector. That's why you see the WO European patent 666 Microsoft, they were trying to compute the vector and parameters. So you can see here that V is the parameter tensor, and IJK weighted sum Z, IJK. See if I put in all the other. The parameter tensor contains all the parameters that control the neuron activation functions in one layer. Just like to emphasize this. So this is what I'm trying to say about the Computer Tom. Okay, Computer Tom thinks that with a parameter tensors of all the 100+, including the duped military, 100+ military at Wuhan event, for example, and a lot of other events that I can cite on an annual basis, Computer Tom will be able to have a parameter tensor of all the parameters that control the neuron activation functions. That is why he built a computer model with the mathematical functions, criminal mathematical functions, which is his operations. So you can see here that he sums it up. Yeah. You can see this is a summation. Right. This is proof evidence of computer Tom's operations and his criminal mathematical functions. So you can see here in equation 2, the weighted sum in equation 2 is referred to as the output equivalent to using a linear activation function. And a weighted sum is an intermediate result computed by multiplying each input with the corresponding weight. So you can see the multiplication process here, x, and w is the weighted, is the weight. So a weighted sum of all the inputs computed in stages by accumulating one or more partial sums. Every element of the input data x can be connected to every neuron by a separate weight. So the weight tensor W generally has 6 dimensions. Concatenating the 3 dimensions of the input data tensor, input row A, input column B, and input feature C with 3 dimensions of the output data tensor, output row I, output column J, and output feature K. So W is the weighted tensor. You attach weights to the connections. The multiplication is the dot that you see here. X is the input data, ABC. I will be explaining in a separate section how the microchip looks like, which matches all the medical evidence captured by the medical doctors, photographic evidence, and also the signals transmitting from the mortuary of the Mac. How it looks like, so then you'll be able to see that from the microchip, you'll be able to, at least in the Pope's criminal method, he figures that he can use the microchip axon dendrites and synapse, be able to map out a neural network of all the duped military, for example, 100 plus in an event, and multiply it with the weights and do a summation. So the microchip is you can see that there's the axon dendrites and synapse are in a horizontal crisscross with vertical columns, horizontal rows with vertical columns, and that is how you'll be able to pinpoint the exact input and output and sum it all up. And so this every element of the input data X that you see here is connected to every neuron by a separate weight, and so the weight tensor W will have 6 dimensions. And the weight is a scalar weight that decodes the strength of the connection. 2 neurons are connected if the output of one is the input of the other, and the weight tensor contains all the weights that connect the inputs to the layer. An artificial neuron is the mathematical function, which is a nonlinear function or linear combination of all its inputs. By applying the nonlinear activation function to a weighted sum, the neuron computes its output, which is called the activation. So the artificial neuron is likely the clone entity. This is a possible deduction. Is not stated explicitly, but the artificial neuron could be the clone entity, for example, which in layman terms means soul sucked out of the physical body, but the artificial neuron could be, I'm just saying that it could be the clone entity bodily activities while the original stays in the status chamber that you see in the movies, for example. Now let's take a look at the IBM diagram of the execution sequence of algorithm offline learning. You can see here very clearly, offline learning. Referring to IBM Figure 11, offline chip in-brain CO-VAX circuitry transactions or computations mentioned in the Computer Bank of England and the Computer Bank of Russia Model D. is substituted with alternatives, near-field communications, or Bluetooth. And you see here at the bottom, figure 8A to C shows diagram of tensor mapping. You see a lot of this when I start to talk about Computer Yuan, the Computer Yuan, which is the Computer Bank of Korea, and there's Computer Bank of Japan, which is Computer Yen, and even also neural mapping in Computer Yuan. But of course, all these are computer blueprints only. It's not the people that wants any of these things. So figure 8A to C shows diagrams of tensor mapping and neuromorphic systems that can access data from multiple sensors. For example, yourself or electronic devices, but suppose the COVAX circuitry sensor in brain or physical cell phone sensors simultaneously. A neural inference COVAX drug circuitry chip is a specific physical instance of an inference processing unit, which is why you have a global micro engine here. Can be referred to a chip micro engine, and a local micro engine will be considered a core micro engine or a local controller. But to put it bluntly, it is murder actually, because you're putting metals and you're putting graphene oxide into the bodily cells and organs. So a neural inference, not suppose they actually did it. So a COVAX drug circuitry microchip, and if you match it with the global micro engine in the computer here, microchip populations, which will further be explained in another pattern showing the specific synapse population 1 to 4, but I will extend it to 100 plus. And if it's a global micro engine, it will be called a chip. But if it's a local micro engine, it is a core. Or the point is that there is some distinction. When you use the word chip, you're referring to 100 plus. But if you're referring to core, it can be at individual level or it's a microcontroller. So the point is that the word controller in the GDPR law or the data protection law is completely omitted, including finger tag law or fintech law for short. It is completely omitted from all the laws, including publications, academic publications, from the courthouses in all the court cases. So the local controller, the word controller will then be encompass all these things that I've documented in this entire document for all the key nations that I've selected, and also have expressly stated that to do not want this. So let me just go back to, So this controller, quote unquote, is referring to the microcontroller and the macrocontroller under GDPR law, finger tag law, and international criminal law, or international law for short, and it will be classified as chip genocide, systematic and widespread chip crime, because it's widespread, right? It's nationwide. It is also it is statistically compiled in international death stats or excess death stats. It is systematically administered on a widespread basis, and it's war crime. And I've already explained war crime is not war, it's just murder, except that it murders both the military and the civilian. And as long as there's one murder, meaning one death and one organ damage, it will be a classified perp ID individual under international law. So in this case, it will be more like examining the amount that the individual person that took the money from doing the COVAX and the sub-perps 100 plus that administered as sub-perps for the perp that pockets from administering the COVAX, including criminal faculties that sells this idea. can see here very clearly. Next, inference processing unit, the micro engine. How does it work? Figure 4 shows the inference processing unit IPU, which is quote unquote the word processor. And the word processor is a keyword in the data protection law, in the GDPR law, but this entire concept is completely omitted of all the courthouses in the law itself and in all academic discussions. Primarily, one reason is they are not IEEE people. So it's possible that they were unaware. So the processor performs the neural network inference under data protection law, and the IPU 400 that you see here includes transient activation memory 402 that you see here, and inputs activations from activation memory 402 that stores the neuron activations for processing and dividing it into input-output region, the neural computation unit 403 that you see here, which is written back to 402, and the IBM model memory for neural network 401. The reason why I say IBM, because IBM is not the only company. There's many other world-renowned brand names that attempts to set up their own blueprints for neural network. And of course, in order to be able to track the neural brains and do all these computations, they end up intruding into the bodily cells, the neural cells, including waves, and so then it becomes a chip genocide. Here you see in figure 3, evidence of perp operations, computation functions, but in diagrammatical format. The neural core 300. What is the neural core 300? It multiplies M times 1. Input tensor block 301 by end weight tensor 302 accumulates the products into a weighted sum 1 times n intermediate tensor block, so 303. So here is just to give a concept of what it looks like diagrammatically instead of mathematical evidence of computer perp tom. You can see here that this is the intermediate block, this is the output block, this is the input block, and then they put weights and they have the parameters block as well. So it will compute one block of output, which is 305. And on the right-hand side, you can see here, this is the neural core, micro engine, because core is more like the local or individual. So here is vector, which also appears in the cryptocurrencies 666, European pattern, Microsoft. But cross-reference with IBM, this is the vector, matrix, multiply, or VMM for short. So targets for the vector unit 610. See. Partial sum memory 611. In here. Yeah, okay, you can see it here. Vector unit 611, partial sum memory 611. SRC, which is partial sum results for subsequent cycles, and activation unit 612. You can see here the activation unit 612 in figure 6. I merely took out this middle portion, 609, from here. 609 is here. I took it out so that it's clearer that there is partial sums here and then activations, and this column here is the vector matrix multiply VMN 609. But plug it back in here, this is what you see, the vector unit 611. Results for subsequent cycles, activation unit 612, which is here. and partial sum network 603 here. Sources for the vector unit 610 is here. 610 is this whole chunk here. 610 is this whole rectangular box. So targets for the vector unit 610 includes partial sums 611 here. The SRC partial sums on top, you can see here, partial sums for subsequent cycles and activation unit 612, which is here. The activation unit, you can see it's written here very clearly, activation unit. And the partial sums network 603, it's here. This is the IBM, they call it the core compute operation. The weight memory 607 is over here. Weight memory 607. And gives the instructions of read-write, computer read-write from the partial sum 611 here. Now we look at the core control micro engine 613, which is the instructions memory. This is the micro engine 613. See over here. And the core control micro engine 613 orchestrates the core computation and data movement. The micro engine issues read activation or wait memory address operation to load input or wait activation block into the vector matrix multiply. This is the function of the micro engine instruction 613. The micro engine issues vector matrix multiply, compute operation, vector matrix multiply, unit compute array, and computes partial sum block. Now the weight matrix computation looks like this. Computer Tom Purpose mathematical formula. The weight matrix W is read from the weight memory 607 by vector matrix multiply unit 609. The activation vector V is read from the activation memory 605 by the vector matrix multiply VMM unit 609, then computes the vector matrix multiplication, which is shown here. What is a micro rotor? Because this term appears, suspiciously appears, and so I will go on to explain what it is in the vector unit context. A micromotor, I submit, is like a time machine, because a micromotor is a timepiece, and let's just suppose the micromotor timepiece is injected through the COVAX circuitry chip in the vector unit. First of all, the rotor is an electromagnetic system with a motor, electric generator, or alternator. The whole purpose of the rotor is to produce a torque around the rotor's axis using interaction between windings and magnetic fields. The microrotor is placed inside a timepieces. So those people who owns a timepiece shop, they can explain to you this is how it works, and they will have knowledge of this. Now, if you combine this with computer kingpin perps Tom's whole point of vector computation logic, it then becomes clear he is attempting to achieve teleportation in time travel using microcircuitry, for example, microrotor, through microconstruction circuitry chip by microbots introduced by COVAX graphene oxide GO combined with Wi-Fi frequency bandwidth increment. Number two, using the sample IBM neuromorphic system, he could be with the chemical drugs ionized membrane, potentials neurogrid, POP 100 plus, cells infused, in addition to 1 organ damage and 1 murder to constitute a PERP individual under international law, he could be also thinking of mutating the cells. Because when the cells mutate, he can become a beast, for example, and that's why it is a 666. The beast slave will become a labor exploited, for example, in documented outer space colonies. And I will then explain the Microsoft European Pattern 666, the parameters and vectors, how does it work to compute the bus architecture as a cross-reference. And once you are in an outer space colony, or he may even be thinking on Earth, in that pattern itself, 666, there is an e-reward system. And you start to realize this e-reward system is very strange. And this is like a Wi-Fi programmable money, electronic money, but it is not money. And you can log on, for example, with the CO-VAX circuitry sensor, microchip in brain, or electronic devices. And the point about electronic devices and in-brain sensors is its ability to compute the bodily cells, parameters, algorithm, computation logic by computer term. And in practice, the long-going experimental, they call it the pedo ring, but there's like involvement of drugs and electroshock, some of the slave workers and the super soldiers clone stored in the statis chamber on 20-year, 40-year back US Navy teleportation technologies. So then we start to get to see some more answers. A perfect match with the IBM, UK agent, China investment, New York, among AXI slave. Now this is not, he's not the China investment, but he's with a claim to be a UK-based IPO-listed NASDAQ owned by SoftBank. So previously it wasn't owned by SoftBank. But what is the reason why I put it here? The UK agent, China investment, I'll explain very shortly. It's not, I'm not saying that it's him. But the reason why I place his photo next here is because you can see very clearly here for yourself where my cursor is encircling. You can see the word arm here. The answer is just right here. The IBM deployable neural inference targeted at the military of 100 plus, and they devised events to lure 100 plus military of 100 plus nations. And you see this word arm here very clearly. You can see it matches arm. And it claims to be UK-based arm. And the reason why it got something to do with SoftBank was because they just wanted to stock list it, and of course for substantial numbers of zeros. So if you see the equation here, SoftBank plus ARM, and fill out the blank out letters, ARM is equated with software, bank in company, and here you can see that the IBM AXI slave master with the word ARM appears on the bottom right-hand corner of figure 12. So to conclude, there is a perfect match between the IPO listed on NASDAQ UK-based ARM with IBM AXI slave master, 100 plus neurogrid population, especially targeted at the 100 plus military, therefore constituting war crime, which is murder, and is registered at some addresses. For example, let me just see if I listed here. Okay, I did. The IBM UK applicants is at PO Box 41, North Harbour, Portsmouth, Hampshire, PO 63AUGB, short for Great Britain. And IBM China Investment at 25F Pangu Plaza, number 27 Central North 4th Ring Road, Chaoyang District, Beijing, which is near World Bank, which is the Washington, D.C. based global Indians that cashier in from COVAX chip killing the Americans, with UK agent at UK Limited IP Law, Huxley Park, Winchester, Hampshire, Great Britain, IBM, New York, Armonk. The reason why I put the word Armonk earlier on, because of course the word monk or Mongtao, and because it's Armonk at Orchard Road, and you can see that there's a close connection between Orchard Road, New York, and the history of the 1965 plot against Singapore Phoenix Orchard Road. But anyway, let's not just go there yet. Let's just take a look at here. So the reason why I had to look at some of the addresses. So I also wrote here, you see that the Armonk is New Orchard Road, USA. This may not be a coincidence that you see a shopping mall that has the design of ionized membrane potentials that call itself the Moneyland Mall design at Orchard Road, Singapore. So there is some connection. Whether it is sabotage or it is actual perps, we'll just leave that for the judgment and some other documents. But the other thing I want to highlight, the reason as to why I want to look at the address is because there is always a dupe 100+ military at Wuhan using sports and as an excuse. And you can see here that again, this IBM UK agent, besides being an applicant, I wanted to highlight because it's targeting the people of China investment. That's why it's called China investment. There's one Shanghai address, but there's also another address, which is at the Asian Games Village. So again, this is not coincidence. It's right at the heart of the capital of China, and it's always have got this sports excuse. And they are tying it to the military to dupe 100+ nations military into a sports excuse, but it is actually a money scam, in my opinion, and it's also a murder scam, meaning it is to con the money of nations and also using the military as a means to con the money of nations and also to murder nations. And so it is the reason why I would call it with the statistics proven that it is a cheap genocide, cheap systematic and widespread crime, and it is a cheap war crime, meaning it is intentionally to murder the military. And it is a money scam by, for example, the Bs, the EB, meaning electronic banks, the infra B, which is the land thieves versus the rightful inheritance, forbidden land of future offsprings versus the land thieves, or in other words, the construction, infrastructure, and development B's offspring that they will steal from a future time frame in the now, and also the WB and the ADB body bags. And all the Bs in general are just random self-titled B toms that just results in a world money shrinkage transferred to the Tom's pocket, when it rightfully, including the land, the properties, the businesses, the business accounts, and the shareholders, it belongs to the people of every nation, not some random B or EB or infra B or construction B or the free flow B and the WB and the ADB body bags and all the B. So this is the final slide. The point is that further analysis can be made in accordance with the product's registered location, which is why we can look at the location. Because the location is it's like it's the indication of the which nation, and if they lure 100+ military to that nation, they're thinking of robbing 100+ nations and killing 100+ nations, including killing 100+ nations military. Of world robbery electronic product salesmen, electronic brands owners, so we have to ask them informally, the company brands they are representing and things like that, to tracing the identity of the chip. Where is the chip and the controller? Could it be some of the registered addresses targeting certain population groups or 100+ population groups? NASDAQ, all trading platforms are casino-like. They are subjected to the monitor screen manipulation, pressing 000. All trading platforms, it's not just NASDAQ. So they stock list a murder product, which is a copied ancient replica, and then they press a lot of zeros, electronic digits for themselves and their offsprings, titling themselves as speed banks or electronic B or infra B, to rob the land as land is that belongs to the eternal land of future offsprings of nations, and to murder the military by creating events to lure them to congregation for this money scam. The satellite products, which link to the pay gang, we call it the pay gang, or the Bank of Japan governor call it the XYZ pay. The point is, it is known that this is electronic digits, a store of value in electronic digits. It is not money. So they're rushing, and I will talk more about this in the Computer Yuan document, which clearly shows a huge chip over circuit board nations. So there's some here, there's just some examples. They can name it anything with next to the word pay. It may not be fast pay, can be fat pay, fat pie, wire, fast pay. There's a lot of such electronic B that robs. They're rushing to rob the people. There's base station, so we already covered some of the base station, base transmission station, transmitter and receiver of such data using radio frequency, which is also documented in the Telecommunications American law. I've also run through all the controller and processor, which is in the GDPR law. It's covered by GDPR law. It's just that it is omitted from courthouses. It was not discussed, maybe ignorance. So it is a key component in great technical criminal blueprint and details in this entire document. It is omitted, but it is documented here in this one document. So there's controller, there's processor blueprints, there's controller blueprints, there's the entire tier 1, tier 2 blueprints. There is the computer nations that I've selected: Computer Yuan, Yen, Won, United States of America, USMCA plot, Nordic Europe, Swiss plot, the +3 plot, and some of the Indian names I'll be putting into a table, just a small selection. They are considered trespassers actually, because it's rupees versus the dollars group. They've been collecting stash for 60 years. They've been using World Cities ID while collecting the stash of dollars and euro currencies versus rupees to enter certain states in the USA, like St. Joe's, Portland, Washington, D.C., WB COVAX killed Americans. There's satellite also about the timetables, the chip, where are they accessing from. This is all part of tracing where the base stations and the key culprits. So with this, I'll end the 11.5. We already gotten some of the key answers, and I will be explaining the other selected computer blueprints. Thank you for your time.